Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Few days later, Four-Leaf Clover Town. The air was alive with color, scent, and sound. Wow, this place is awesome. Naruto's voice rang out like a burst of sunlight, cutting through the chatter and clamor of the busy street. He spun in place, head tilted back, wide-eyed as he took in the towering buildings around them, his expression a mixture of childlike awe and barely contained energy. His sapphire eyes darted from one storefront to another, drinking in the riot of lights and movement with the hunger of someone who'd lived too long in gray spaces. Each building seemed louder than the last, painted in bright, clashing colors, some adorned with gilded edges, others glowing with flickering neon kanji that blinked promises of riches and escape. The street beneath their feet was paved in smooth cobblestone, the kind that had been worn by time and footsteps. Music floated through the air, upbeat, quick-tempoed, blending seamlessly with the sounds of clinking coins, dice tumbling across tables, and voices raised in cheer or complaint. Laughter spilled from the open doors of taverns and casinos, mingling with the scent of grilled meats, fried dumplings, and sugary pastries thick in the breeze. Street performers cartwheeled through crowds, trailing streamers and bursts of confetti. Fire breathers and illusionists performed at intersections, drawing small circles of enthralled onlookers. Rich nobles passed by in lacquered carriages, flanked by bodyguards dressed in black, while merchants barked deals from behind stalls loaded with trinkets, scrolls, charms, and rare spices. Second most visited place in all the land of fire, Jiraiya said from beside him, voice casual as he walked with his hands tucked into his sleeves. His expression was relaxed, almost amused, but his eyes never stopped moving, watchful, sharp beneath his laid-back grin. Naruto tore his gaze from a window display where a crystal chandelier spun under a rotating light, throwing tiny rainbows across the glass. Seriously, not even the fire capital gets this many people. Nope, Jiraiya replied with a chuckle. The capital's for politicians, suits, scrolls, court meetings, and a whole lot of people who forgot how to smile. He gestured lazily to the boulevard in front of them, where another flash of color exploded from a nearby club entrance, a pair of dancers twirling ribbons into the night sky. But this is a dream town. A getaway. People come here to lose themselves in lights, luck, and fantasies. It's not about power. It's about forgetting everything for a little while. Naruto nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on a pair of kids laughing as they chased a puppet dragon weaving through the air, its wings trailing paper flames. It felt unreal. The noise, the lights, the freedom. No whispers. No suspicious glares. No heavy silence when he passed by. For once, he didn't feel like an outsider. Like someone who needed to shrink himself to fit the room. Here, everyone was too busy chasing something of their own to care who he was. It's like a whole different world, he thought, the weight in his chest lifting with a strange kind of lightness he wasn't used to. Jiraiya watched him out of the corner of his eye. He didn't say anything, not yet, but the faint tug at the corner of his mouth said plenty. Let the brat have this moment. Let him feel the world without chains. Hey, Naruto said suddenly, walking ahead a few steps and spinning around to grin at him. Are we actually staying here? Like, for real? Stay close. Jiraiya's voice cut clean through the chaotic rhythm of the boulevard, firm and precise, like a thread tugging Naruto back to earth. It wasn't shouted, wasn't angry. Just sharp enough to carry weight. The kind of voice that came from someone who had seen too many people vanish in crowds just like this. Who knew how quickly a moment of wonder could turn into regret? Naruto blinked and looked up, startled from his thoughts. The lights, the smells, the laughter, it had all pulled him in like a tide. But now Jiraiya's words anchored him again. This place is a maze, the old man continued, his eyes scanning the ever-moving crowd. One wrong turn and you'll be 3 streets over without realizing. And I'm not in the mood to chase you through back alleys and gambling dens. Yeah, I get it, Ero Sennin, Naruto muttered with a roll of his eyes, but his feet fell in step beside Jiraiya's all the same. His gaze still bounced around like a pinball, taking in the flashing signs, the chattering tourists, the aroma of every food stall they passed. A row of them stretched out along the sidewalk like a miniature food festival, sizzling noodles tossed in tall iron woks, sweet buns puffing with steam, skewered meats roasted over open flames. Smoke and spices clung to the air like perfume. It was impossible to ignore. Naruto's stomach let out a low, insistent growl. Jiraiya arched a brow. Hungry again already? But Naruto didn't reply. He'd stopped walking. His eyes weren't on the skewers, or the dumplings, or even the perfectly crisp fried fish. They were locked on something deeper in the shadows, just past the stall, in a narrow alley between two tall buildings, where the light didn't reach. Jiraiya's smile faded the moment he followed the boy's gaze. Half hidden behind a stack of broken crates, a woman and a small boy huddled near a dented metal bin. The woman was gaunt, her face pale and drawn with the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than sleepless nights. Her sleeves hung loosely off stick-thin arms as she dug through discarded scraps. The child beside her clutched at her leg, wide eyes staring out from beneath a tangled curtain of dark hair, watchful, silent, and hollow with hunger. Jiraiya didn't speak. Didn't need to. Because Naruto was already moving. The boy stepped up to the food stall and, without hesitation, slapped a few coins on the counter. He grabbed the warmest roll of bread and the largest piece of fried fish he could carry. Steam still curled from them as he walked, slowly, carefully, toward the alley. "Oi, Naruto," Jiraiya called, but the words came out soft, not sharp. He didn't stop him. He just watched. Watched as the boy he was supposed to be teaching knelt down in front of two strangers and held out everything he had. "Here," Naruto said quietly, scratching at the back of his head. His voice was small, not shy, just gentle. "You need it more than I do." The woman froze. Her eyes darted between the food and Naruto's face, like she didn't know whether to believe it. Slowly, with shaking hands, she reached out. As she accepted the bread and fish, her eyes began to glisten. Then Naruto did something else. He pulled open the coin pouch tied to his belt and pressed the rest of his money into her hand. No hesitation. No ceremony. Just gave. For a breathless moment, the woman said nothing. Then she collapsed forward, dropping to her knees, clutching the meal and the coins to her chest, and Naruto, too. She pulled him into a tight embrace, burying her face in his shoulder as her voice cracked through the alley. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Naruto stiffened instantly, his arms awkwardly hovering in the air like he'd been hit by a jutsu he didn't recognize. His face flushed red, his mouth twitching like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Hey, it's no big deal," he mumbled. One hand patted her back, hesitant but sincere. "Really. It's fine." Jiraiya watched from the mouth of the alley, unmoving. The noise of the street faded around him, muffled by the depth of the moment playing out in front of him. There was no spotlight, no cheering crowd, no reward waiting at the end. Just a boy who had grown up with nothing giving what little he had without question. And in that instant, Jiraiya didn't see Naruto the prankster. Or Naruto the Jinchuriki. Or Naruto the student who still couldn't manage a proper clone. He saw Minato. The same quiet kindness. The same instinct to help. But as pride swelled in his chest, it was swiftly overtaken by another feeling. Darker. Sharper. Unforgiving. And yet Konoha turned its back on him. They let him starve. They let him hurt. They let him believe, for years, that he was less. And now, he was out here in the back alleys of a foreign town, doing what no one had done for him. Jiraiya's hands curled into fists at his sides, his face unreadable beneath the shadow of his hair. "You deserved better," he thought bitterly, watching Naruto slowly pull away from the woman, his face red but his eyes steady. "You always did." Naruto returned a few moments later, jogging lightly back to Jiraiya's side, his footsteps barely audible over the noise of the street. That familiar smile was back on his face, but it had changed. It wasn't just excitement or curiosity anymore. It was something gentler, softer, like the quiet glow of a lantern in the dark. There was pride in it. Not loud or boastful, just a small, steady light burning behind his eyes. The kind that comes from doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Okay, Aro Senin, he said, voice lighter now as he matched pace beside him. Who are we looking for again? Jiraiya blinked, the remnants of bitter reflection still clinging to the edges of his thoughts. He shook them off with a practiced ease, though the shadow in his eyes hadn't quite vanished. He plastered on a grin, one of those big, ridiculous ones that usually came before trouble or teasing, but this time, it didn't quite reach all the way. We're here to find Tsunade, he said simply, sliding his hands into the sleeves of his robe as they walked. One of my old teammates. Legendary Sannin. Medical genius. Gambling disaster. Naruto raised an eyebrow, curious. Tsunade. Huh, what's she like? Jiraiya let out a long, theatrical sigh, part wistful memory, part pure showman. He clasped his hands behind his head and tilted his chin skyward like he was reminiscing over a long-lost love. Beautiful, he said dramatically, eyes gleaming. A vision of unmatched grace and charm. Naruto squinted at him. And absolutely terrifying, Jiraiya added a beat later, grin turning sheepish. She once broke my ribs just for looking at her the wrong way. Naruto snorted, amused, but didn't press further. He didn't need to. He'd learned by now that second-hand stories rarely painted the whole picture. People always filtered their memories through emotion, fear, love, pride, regret. They saw what they wanted to see, remembered what suited them. I'll decide for myself, he thought, gaze flicking up to the blinking signs overhead. No one ever really saw me either, after all. Not really. Just what they expected. The crowd thickened as they turned onto another main street. Music blared from somewhere up ahead. A group of performers tossed glowing sticks into the air, and coins clinked into a collection bowl on the ground. The scent of roasted chestnuts and honeyed tea hung in the air, making Naruto's stomach grumble again. Jiraiya led the way without missing a beat, weaving through the crowd with a traveler's ease. Naruto followed, eyes sharp now, his earlier wonder tempered by a deeper purpose. They weren't just sightseeing anymore. This town, with all its lights and noise and chaos, had suddenly taken on a new shape, a starting point. A crossroads. Somewhere in the noise and neon, one of the legendary Sannin was hiding. And Naruto was going to find her. Searching for Tsunade. The sun had long begun its slow descent, dipping beneath the rooftops and casting the sprawling streets of four-leaf clover in hues of deep amber and molten gold. But even as dusk rolled in, the town didn't sleep. If anything, it came alive. The light shifted, from warm daylight to flickering neon. Glowing kanji signs blinked in shades of red, blue, and violet, painting the cobblestones beneath Naruto's feet in ever-changing color. Every casino they passed seemed louder than the last, pulsing with laughter, music, and the metallic clatter of dice and coins. The scent of grilled meat mingled with perfume and cigarette smoke, carried on a breeze thick with life. Street lamps flickered to life, their lantern glow dim compared to the riot of color spilling from taverns and gambling dens. Naruto walked just behind Jiraiya, caught in the sensory overload but adjusting quickly. The crowd pressed in around them, tourists, merchants, locals, performers, all swept up in their own worlds. It reminded Naruto of a river. Loud, fast, impossible to control. He kind of liked it. She's got to be around here somewhere, Jiraiya muttered as they ducked into yet another bar, his voice low but certain. His sharp eyes moved quickly, scanning every face and corner like a hawk circling above a field. According to one of my spies, she arrived last night. The bar was dim, filled with the low hum of conversation and a haze of smoke that clung to the ceiling like fog. Round tables were scattered across the floor, their surfaces cluttered with half-empty glasses, crumpled betting slips, and the occasional ashtray. A trio of musicians played a slow, jazzy tune near the corner stage, blending into the murmur of voices and the clinking of glass. Naruto leaned against the doorway, arms folded across his chest. His eyes swept the room once, lazily, but with focus. A group of card players laughed raucously at a table in the back, while a waiter moved between tables balancing drinks with effortless ease. There were gamblers, drinkers, and hustlers aplenty, but no sign of a blonde medic nin with a reputation for broken tables and bigger debts. You sure your spy didn't screw up? Naruto asked, glancing sideways at Jiraiya with a skeptical tilt of his brow. Positive, Jiraiya replied, not missing a beat. If there's one thing Tsunade can't resist, it's gambling. Trust me, it's not if she shows up, it's when. Naruto gave a small, resigned shrug and let his eyes wander again. It had been a long day of walking, searching, asking questions, and always just missing her by a few hours or a few streets. Still, there was something peaceful in the chaos around him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel watched. He didn't have to keep his guard up for whispers or glares. No one here cared about the Nine Tails. No one saw him as anything but another kid passing through a busy town. It was strange and nice. As they stepped back out into the streets, the neon lights hit them again like a wave. A parade of colors shimmered across Naruto's face as he stretched his arms over his head and yawned. Jiraiya ran a hand through his thick white hair and let out a long sigh. All right, kid, he said, his voice carrying a trace of fatigue. Let's take a break. She'll turn up soon enough. Naruto's stomach growled before he could answer, loud enough that a nearby couple glanced over with mild amusement. Hey, guess I'm starving again, Naruto muttered, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Jiraiya chuckled and reached over, ruffling his hair with a calloused hand. Come on, let's get you fed. You've earned it. Naruto grinned, already imagining dumplings, noodles, and something fried, very fried. He jogged ahead toward a row of food stalls lining the next block, the scent of roasted garlic and soy sauce teasing him forward. Behind him, Jiraiya followed with a slower pace, eyes still scanning the crowd, senses tuned to every detail. She's close, he thought. And when they found her, the real work would begin. The restaurant was modest, tucked quietly into the corner of a side street where the noise of the main boulevard softened into something calmer, gentler. Paper lanterns bobbed in the warm breeze just outside, their soft glow casting long shadows across the aged wooden exterior. The sign above the entrance was faded, its paint chipped and worn by time, but the warm light spilling from the windows spoke of comfort, not neglect. Naruto's stomach gave an impatient growl as they stepped inside. The air hit him like a wave. Grilled meat, simmering broth, spices he couldn't name but desperately wanted to eat. The inside was cozy, filled with mismatched tables and soft chatter. Locals and travelers alike hunched over bowls of steaming ramen or clinked glasses of sake in quiet celebration. Laughter drifted from the far corner, muffled by the wood-paneled walls and thick paper dividers. But as Naruto crossed the threshold, his smile wavered. His footsteps slowed. His eyes swept the room, not with curiosity, but with caution. It was subtle. The way his shoulders pulled inward, the way his hand tightened slightly around the strap of his bag. His gaze flicked to the kitchen staff, then to the nearest table, his mouth set in a careful line. Jiraiya, already halfway to the hostess stand, turned and noticed the hesitation immediately. You good? He asked, voice quiet but firm. Naruto shrugged, not looking at him. Yeah, fine. His tone was light, but his stance was too guarded. Like he was waiting for someone to sneer. To point. To tell him he didn't belong here. It hit Jiraiya like a gut punch. He'd seen this behavior before. In war orphans. In Jinchuriki. In kids who learned early that people didn't want them taking up space. Damn Konoha, he thought bitterly. How many times did they toss him out of places like this? But then Naruto stopped. Not in discomfort, something else. He turned toward the front window, just past a small booth, his head tilting slightly. His shoulders eased. The tension melted like mist beneath sunlight. What's up? Jiraiya asked, stepping beside him, following his line of sight out through the fogged glass. The street outside was still alive, people bustled past, vendors packed up their carts, lanterns lit one by one. It looked the same as before. But Naruto leaned in, one hand resting lightly against the window frame. His brows furrowed in quiet focus. I think I found your teammate, he said finally. Jiraiya blinked. You what? Naruto nodded toward the street. Out there, by the fountain. Jiraiya peered through the window, squinting, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just a slow-moving crowd. No flash of blonde hair. No commanding presence. No telltale voice shouting at a dealer for cheating. You sure? He asked, skeptical. And how would you even know what Tsunade looks like? Naruto tilted his head, squinting again. You said she's blonde. Honey brown eyes. And you, kind of wouldn't shut up about how beautiful and terrifying she is. Jiraiya chuckled, amused despite himself. Fair enough. Naruto continued, tone thoughtful. But mostly, I can feel her chakra. That made Jiraiya pause. Naruto didn't say it dramatically. It was casual, offhand, like he was talking about the weather. It's huge. Like yours. Dense. It's heavy. Feels like it's pushing down on everything nearby. Hard to miss. Jiraiya's amusement vanished. He turned fully toward the boy now, watching him with a new kind of focus. You can sense her chakra? He asked slowly. Like that? Naruto shrugged, fidgeting with the strap of his bag. Yeah, I mean, not always. But when it's strong and close. Yeah, I feel it. Yours too. Even mine, sometimes. It's weird, but it's been like that for a while. Jiraiya's jaw tightened. Untrained. Raw. A natural sensor. And no one ever noticed. Not Kakashi. Not the instructors. Not anyone. They'd ignored it. Just like everything else. Another wasted potential buried under years of neglect and bare minimum survival. Before Jiraiya could say anything else, Naruto added, with absolute deadpan delivery. Oh, and also while we were walking around, you kept going on and on about her chest. Said no one compares to her. I figured if someone matched that description and had a massive chakra signature, it was probably her. For a moment, the restaurant went very, very quiet in Jiraiya's head. A single blink. Jiraiya stared. You really didn't have to say that part out loud, you know. Naruto blinked innocently. You really didn't have to say it 8 times. Out loud. In public. I was making a point. You were making people stare. Jiraiya groaned and dragged a hand down his face. Remind me why I'm taking you seriously again. Naruto grinned, stepping away from the window. Because I found your teammate, and you didn't. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. You're getting the cheap bowl of ramen. Hey, with Tsunade. The afternoon air hung heavy over the streets of Four-Leaf Clover Town, thick with the mingling scent of roasting meats, sweet perfume, hot oil, and the acrid tinge of smoke wafting from the rows of vendor carts. The low hum of the crowd was a constant, like the town itself breathed in rhythm with the golden haze settling over the rooftops. Lanterns flickered to life one by one as the sun slipped lower, their soft glow bouncing off glass and polished stone. The world was alive with color and noise, but for Tsunade, the day had already curdled into irritation. Her strides were long, lazy, but held an unmistakable tension. Hands stuffed deep into the pockets of her green haori, she moved through the crowd like a force of nature unwilling to part for anyone. Her expression was flat, the kind that warned others not to speak unless they had something particularly smart, or suicidal, to say. Another casino. Another million Ryo lost. Just like that. Gone with a smirk and the turn of a card. Worse, the sleazy manager had leaned in afterward, breath reeking of sake and ego, to offer her a private game. Strip poker, he'd whispered, with a wink. Winner gets a special prize, he said. Her knuckles had cracked so loud it cut through the music. She hadn't put him through the wall, though she'd wanted to, but the drink she'd hurled at his face had earned her some satisfaction. Still, satisfaction didn't pay debts. And she was rapidly running out of places that hadn't blacklisted her. Now, walking the neon-lit street, She was looking for Shizune, or more accurately, looking for someone to nag into giving her more cash. Her long blonde hair slipped loose from its ties, catching the breeze, and her heels clicked against the worn stone road in a sharp, even rhythm. She sighed, brushing a strand behind her ear, her patience thinner than rice paper. So when something tugged gently at the hem of her coat, she turned on instinct, ready to snap. Her gaze dropped. It wasn't a drunk, or a beggar, or even some starry-eyed fanboy. It was a kid, maybe 12 or 13 at most, with bright, messy blonde hair that practically defied gravity. His skin was tanned, his face round but sharp with mischief. What caught her off guard, though, were the marks, 3 whisker-like lines etched into each cheek, like scars or birthmarks that gave him a fox-like edge. But more than that were his eyes. Clear, bright, blue as a summer sky at noon. And filled not with fear or awe, but curiosity. Tsunade blinked. "What do you want, kid?" she asked, her voice gruff out of habit but not cruel. "If you're here to collect a debt, I'm broke." The boy tilted his head, not bothered in the slightest. "Debt collector? Nah." He scratched the back of his neck. "I just wanted to ask you something." That caught her off guard. She arched a brow, crossing her arms. "Oh, all right then. Ask." He looked up at her, gaze steady. "Are you Tsunade?" The question was simple, but there was weight in the way he said it, like it mattered. Tsunade narrowed her eyes slightly. She took him in again, this time slower. There was something about his presence that tugged at the back of her mind. Familiar in a way she couldn't place. The hair, the eyes, and something else. Something deeper. "Yeah," she answered, cautious now. "I'm Tsunade. Who's asking?" The boy shifted awkwardly, as if he'd just stepped over an invisible line and wasn't sure how far he wanted to go. "My sensei told me about you," he said, eyes flicking away for a beat. "Jiraiya." At the sound of the name, Tsunade's brows twitched. Of course he did, she thought with an exasperated sigh. That old fool would have to be nearby. Probably lurking behind a street lamp or spying from a rooftop, waiting for a dramatic moment to show up and announce himself like some wandering sage in a storybook. At the mention of the name, Tsunade's posture shifted, just barely. It was subtle, a slight tightening of her shoulders, a faint stillness in her breath. Anyone else might have missed it. But years of war and wandering had trained her well. She could smother a reaction in a heartbeat. Bury instinct beneath indifference. Then something flickered in her chest. Something old and deeply buried. Her eyes fell on his face again. The roundness of his cheeks, the brightness in those impossibly blue eyes. There was a warmth to them, a fire she hadn't seen in years. Something stubborn and proud and so achingly familiar. Kushina. The name came unbidden, startling her. But then, just as quickly, she saw it. His hair, the shape of his eyes, the natural tilt of confidence in his stance. Minato. Both of them. He was a walking echo of people she had lost. Her thoughts were interrupted when the boy suddenly smiled, completely oblivious to the storm he was stirring in her chest. "You're really pretty," the boy said, without hesitation, his voice warm and impossibly sincere. Tsunade blinked. The words struck so hard and fast she almost laughed. "What? My sensei wasn't lying," Naruto went on, grinning. "You've got really beautiful eyes." There was no flirtation, no sleaze, no game, just a compliment offered with the same ease as someone pointing out the color of the sky. Pure, blunt, honest. Tsunade stood still, stunned by how simple it was. She'd spent years drowning in sleazy remarks, in men whose eyes dropped to her chest before ever meeting her gaze. She was used to catcalls and crude jokes, and even Jiraiya, especially Jiraiya, had spent decades pretending to be charming while saying the dumbest things imaginable. But this was different. It reminded her of how Kushina used to blurt out praise like it was a reflex. Or the way Nawaki used to tug at her sleeve just to say she was the prettiest sister in the world. Her cheeks warmed, a faint flush rising to the surface before she smothered it under a crooked smirk. "So that's your game, huh?" she said, folding her arms with mock suspicion. Jiraiya sent you ahead to butter me up. Naruto shrugged, still grinning. Not really. You just looked kinda mad. Thought a compliment might help. So casual, so utterly unfazed, like he hadn't just made her heart stutter for a full beat. Tsunade huffed and opened her mouth to reply, only to pause as her eyes flicked past his shoulder. And there he was. Speak of the devil. Jiraiya was striding down the street like a man who believed every step deserved applause. Arms wide, grin wider, moving like the years had changed nothing. He walked with that same infuriating ease, like the world would catch him if he ever bothered to fall. Tsunade, he called, loud enough to turn a few heads nearby. It's been far too long. She didn't even pretend to smile. And you're still alive, she replied flatly, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Shocking, really. Jiraiya slowed to a stop beside Naruto, seemingly unfazed by the glare leveled at him. What do you want this time? She asked, eyes narrowing. Don't tell me you're here to blow another fortune on rigged dice and cheap sake. He chuckled, brushing non-existent dust from his sleeve. Tempting, he said with a wink. But no, I've got something better in mind. Her brow arched. What could possibly be better than rigged dice and bad decisions? Jiraiya gestured toward Naruto with a grin that was half pride, half mischief. He needs a medical checkup, Jiraiya said, tone more serious now, anchored by something older than duty. Thought it was time he met my old teammate. Tsunade's eyes drifted back to Naruto, but this time, she looked closely. Not just at the surface, at the whiskered cheeks or the bright, sun-roughened skin. She looked past the grin, past the charm, straight into the fire that sat behind those eyes. And it was there. Hot, defiant, familiar. A medical checkup, huh? She repeated, arching a skeptical brow. And what's so special about him? Jiraiya didn't answer right away. His smile faded into something quieter. More thoughtful. More than you'd think, he said. She narrowed her eyes, ready to press further, but Naruto beat her to it. He stepped forward, shoulders square, fists loose at his sides. The boyish grin had faded, replaced with something steady. Real. I don't know if I'm special or anything, he said, voice even and clear. But I'm gonna be Hokage one day. That's a promise. Tsunade blinked, caught slightly off guard. She'd heard those words before. Too many times. Spoken by brash students with stars in their eyes and no idea what it meant. But this kid, he didn't sound arrogant. He wasn't trying to impress her. His voice held no doubt. Only conviction. It stirred something in her chest. Something buried under grief and dead and the weight of too many names carved into stone. She sighed. Long. Exhausted. And then she turned on her heel. Follow me. She didn't say she was interested. She didn't have to. Naruto grinned behind her, already moving, but Jiraiya, unfortunately, couldn't let the moment pass quietly. Behind them came that giggle, that infamous, unmistakable, high-pitched wheeze of perversion that sounded like someone had just discovered a hidden hot spring behind a women's changing room. Tsunade stopped. Her steps halted mid-stride. She didn't even look. Hey, kid, she said, glancing down at Naruto with a sideways look. Her voice was calm, controlled, dangerous. What's your name? Uzumaki Naruto, he replied cheerfully, flashing a full, toothy grin. What's up? And just like that, the name hit her like a punch to the lungs. Uzumaki. The syllables rang in her head louder than any bell. Her expression didn't move, but something deep beneath it cracked. The name slipped under her skin, coiled around her spine. Uzumaki. The hair, the grin, the eyes. It was all but confirmed. This kid, this boy, was Minato's son. Kushina's son. And no one told her. Not the elders. Not the third. Not even Jiraiya. Her hands clenched slightly at her sides, nails digging into her palms. They kept him from me. There were names. Many names. And every one of them had just been written onto a new list in her mind. A list she'd be dealing with when the time came. But not now. Not yet. She exhaled slowly, loosening her fists before anyone could see. Hey, Naruto, she said lightly, glancing over her shoulder again. Think you could walk behind me and make sure this idiot doesn't stare at my. Jiraiya made a strangled sound, clutching his chest like she'd run him through with a katana. Tsunade, how could you accuse me, of such unrefined behavior? Your words wound me deeper than any blade. She didn't even blink. Naruto didn't either. They both turned their heads slowly, matching, synchronized, deadpan. Unimpressed, unamused, utterly, terrifyingly united. Jiraiya deflated, his exaggerated horror shrinking into a sheepish grin. But a glimmer of something soft flickered behind his eyes. That look, that sarcasm, that shared glance of exasperation. Just like Kushina, he thought, heart-twisting. Exactly like her. She used to turn and glare at him the same way, calling him, super pervert, with the kind of tone that should have qualified as a genjutsu. Now here was Naruto, shoulders squared, chin up, sarcastic as hell, mirroring her, mirroring both of them. Sure, I gotcha, Naruto said, giving a casual thumbs up as he moved behind Tsunade. I'll make sure he doesn't do anything gross. Tsunade smirked, clearly pleased. Good. At least one of you has manners. Jiraiya threw his arms up, exasperated. You know, for the record, I'm still a respected Sannin. Debatable, Naruto muttered. Extremely, Tsunade added. They kept walking. Down the narrow street, under the soft glow of lanterns that swayed above them, framed in the quiet laughter of strangers and the low hum of a city in motion. The streets of Four-Leaf Clover Town were alive with the hum of twilight. Lanterns swung gently above the cobbled roads, glowing with soft golden light as dusk settled like a warm blanket over the town. The aroma of grilled skewers, spiced tea, and sweet pastries drifted lazily through the air, tangled with the sounds of laughter and music spilling from open tavern doors. The town pulsed with energy, free, loud, and untamed. Naruto walked just behind Tsunade, his hands behind his head in a loose, lazy posture. His eyes flicked occasionally to the side, not at the glowing signs or the dancing streetlights, but at Jiraiya, keeping careful watch like a self-appointed pervert patrol. But after a few blocks, Naruto noticed something weird. People were staring at him. Specifically, girls. At first, he figured they were looking at Tsunade. That made sense. She stood out like royalty, tall, beautiful, commanding. She had the kind of presence that made people turn their heads twice. But then it kept happening. Two girls near a flower stand whispered behind their hands and giggled, eyes flicking toward him. A trio of older teens passed by and one of them bit her lip before bursting into laughter with her friends. Naruto blinked. What the? He scratched at the back of his neck, brow furrowed. His steps slowed a little as confusion crept in. Why are so many people looking at me? He mumbled under his breath, not really expecting an answer. But Jiraiya heard it. The old man cast a look over his shoulder, and a sly grin curved across his face almost instantly. Well, he said, chuckling low in his throat. Looks like you're a hit with the ladies, kid. Naruto nearly stumbled. What? It's the whiskers, Jiraiya said, waving lazily at his face. The blue eyes. The energy. You've got that same troublemaker charm. Naruto stared at him blankly. That's not a thing. Oh, it is, Jiraiya said smugly. Back in the day, my last student had the same problem. You ever heard of Minato Namikaze? Naruto's face lit up with recognition. Oh yeah, you mentioned him before. He was your student, right? The fourth Hokage. That's the one, Jiraiya nodded proudly. Girls couldn't stop staring at him when he was your age. Sharp, talented, dangerous, but totally clueless about flirting. It's like deja vu. Naruto's face went red on cue, his hand flying up to shield his expression. There's no way they're looking at me like that. They're probably just laughing at my clothes or something. Jiraiya gave him a long look. Kid, no one laughs that hard at clothes. Except maybe me. He let his gaze travel pointedly down to Naruto's bright orange jumpsuit. I mean, Jiraiya said, voice carefully neutral, you are dressed like a walking emergency flare. Naruto flinched. Hey, orange is awesome. It stands out. Exactly. Like a target, Jiraiya said, already grinning. You're basically asking enemy ninja to spot you from a mile away. Naruto crossed his arms defensively. It's my thing, okay. Besides, it's not like I have a lot of options. That's why we're changing that, Jiraiya replied. Eventually. No student of mine's gonna dress like a safety cone forever. TCH. Traitor, Naruto muttered, slouching just enough to sulk dramatically. Jiraiya chuckled again, watching the boy from the corner of his eye. He didn't say it out loud, but the resemblance was there. The grin, the spirit, the conviction, Minato's energy, Kushina's fire, and Naruto, completely unaware, just kept walking, with girls staring, the lights shining, and a future none of them fully understood yet stretching out before him. The trio's path eventually brought them to the edge of the entertainment district, where the lantern-lit chaos gave way to something quieter, more refined. Nestled between two old timber-framed buildings stood a sleek, modern inn that looked like it had been transported from another world. Its clean, glass-paneled facade gleamed softly under the golden twilight, framed with polished metal accents and glowing signage in elegant calligraphy. It radiated luxury, subtle and stylish. Naruto stared at it, squinting. This place looks really fancy, he muttered, his nose practically pressed to the glass. Are we even allowed in here without wearing suits or something? Tsunade didn't even slow down. She strode through the doors with the confidence of someone who either owned the place or was daring anyone to stop her. Jiraiya followed casually, hands in his sleeves and a smirk already playing at the corner of his mouth. Naruto scrambled after them, still trying to understand what counted as inappropriate behavior. The lobby was sleek and serene, obsidian floors, soft lighting, delicate floral arrangements, and the faint, luxurious scent of sandalwood and lavender in the air. It was the kind of place Naruto figured rich people stayed in while doing mysterious rich people things, like sipping tea and judging wallpaper. A woman behind the desk, sharp bob haircut, flawless skin, and a smile honed by years of customer service, looked up and immediately brightened. Welcome back, Lady Akame, she said with a warm, respectful bow. Naruto blinked. Lady, who? He turned to ask, only to feel Jiraiya's hand land firmly on his shoulder. A subtle shake of the head followed. Don't. Tsunade offered a polite nod and walked forward. Just some guests, she said smoothly. Naruto watched, slack-jawed, as her hair darkened a few shades and her eyes shifted subtly from honey gold to a soft, cooler blue. A perfect transformation, so fast and seamless he almost missed it. The receptionist glanced between Jiraiya and Naruto, her eyes briefly widening. Her professional smile didn't falter, but something about it changed. Oh, she said, her voice now laced with something else. Guests. Of course. She leaned in slightly, her tone dropping in pitch. Don't worry, Lady Akame. I'll let the staff know not to disturb you and your companions. Full privacy. No interruptions. Just how you like it. Tsunade blinked. Wait. What? The woman gave her a wink. And a thumbs up. I hope you three have a lovely night together. Naruto smiled cheerfully. Thanks. The place smells really nice, by the way. Tsunade's brain short-circuited. She processed it all in a flash. The receptionist's wink, the loaded tone, the companion's comment. And then came the mental image. Her, Jiraiya, and Naruto, together, alone, in a suite. Her face went crimson faster than a triggered explosive tag. Hey, that's not. But the receptionist was already gone, disappearing behind a sliding door, humming happily. Tsunade stood frozen for a moment, fists clenched at her sides, jaw twitching with suppressed horror. Meanwhile, Naruto looked around the elegant lobby, nodding approvingly. This is way fancier than the places me and Ero Sennin usually stay at, he said innocently. Last one had a leaky ceiling and smelled like pickled fish. Yeah, Jiraiya added casually, lips twitching, but that one didn't come with implied threesomes. Naruto blinked. Implied what? Tsunade didn't answer. She just turned very slowly to face Jiraiya with the cold, deadly calm of someone mentally calculating the square footage required to bury a body. Jiraiya took one step back, hands raised. Hey, don't blame me. I didn't say anything. I just. Not. Another. Word. Naruto, still confused, glanced between them. Did I miss something? Tsunade massaged her temples with both hands. Just. Go pick a bed, Naruto. Sweet. Do we get those little chocolate mints on the pillows? Jiraiya snorted. Tsunade sighed like a woman already regretting every life decision that brought her to this moment. I don't get adults, Naruto muttered to no one in particular, rubbing his temple like he was already too tired to try. It's like, all of you are speaking in riddles or something. Tsunade let out a tired huff and mirrored the motion, pressing two fingers against her own forehead. Kid, if you stick around Jiraiya long enough, you'll stop trying to make sense of anything. It's better for your sanity. Hey, Jiraiya barked, sounding more amused than insulted. He struck a dramatic pose, one hand over his chest like he'd just been accused of treason. I'll have you know I am a model of wisdom, guidance, and long-suffering mentorship. Tsunade didn't even spare him a glance. Sure, she said flatly, tone as dry as kindling. Naruto chuckled despite himself, the tension of the long day slipping from his shoulders. He kicked his feet gently from where he sat on the edge of the ridiculously fluffy bed, looking more relaxed now than he had since arriving in town. Guess I've got a lot to learn, huh? Tsunade glanced sideways at him. The corners of her mouth twitched, just barely. That laugh, that grin, it was pure Kushina. And yet, the quiet resilience behind his eyes, like he'd seen more than most boys his age and kept smiling anyway, that was Minato all over. You've got so much to learn, kid, she thought, watching him with a gaze more thoughtful than amused. But if anyone's stubborn enough to survive it, it's you. Before she could speak, a soft creak echoed from the door at the far side of the suite. The adjoining room opened slowly, and a familiar figure stepped into view, dark eyes alert, posture practiced, calm, and composed. Shizune. Her short black hair was pulled neatly back, her medic nin uniform crisp despite the travel. Tun peeked out from her arms, the tiny pig's snout twitching at the unfamiliar scent in the air. Shizune took one look at the trio, and stopped dead. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not aggressively, but enough to say I know trouble when I see it. Her gaze flicked to Tsunade for a beat, then back to Jiraiya. And finally, it landed on the strange blonde boy who had made himself entirely at home, flopped on the inn's pristine bedding like he'd grown up in luxury. The silence stretched. Lady Tsunade, she said slowly, evenly. What's going on here? There was no panic in her voice. But her stance shifted, just slightly. Feet bracing, shoulders squaring. It was subtle, born of long years at Tsunade's side, of watching her get pulled into half-baked chaos in high-stakes situations. Of being ready to step in if the wrong shadow ever followed her inside. Her hand moved instinctively, sliding Tun into the crook of one arm as the other dropped casually to her side, close enough to her pouch for sedatives, scalpels, or a paralysis tag. Just in case. Jiraiya, still leaning near the doorframe with all the smug confidence of a man who'd survived too many assassination attempts to take anything seriously, lifted both hands in mock surrender. Easy, Shizune, he said, smiling that infuriating, lazy grin of his. No missions. No poison. No ambush. Cross my heart. You've crossed a lot of things, she muttered. He gave a mock gasp. Wounded. Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose. Shizune, stand down. He's not here to drag us back. Just to make everything more complicated. Tsunade let out a slow, long breath through her nose, folding her arms beneath her chest in a quiet show of agreement. She knew that look in Shizune's eyes. Sharp. Alert. 1 second away from taking over the situation if things went sideways. She trained her to be that way. Counted on it. But right now, it wasn't needed. Not yet. Jiraiya, for once, seemed to sense it too. He adjusted his stance, his usual slouch straightening ever so slightly. His grin faded as he purposefully kept his gaze locked at eye level, well away from Tsunade's narrowed, suspicious stare. Smart man. We need to talk, he said at last. The humor bled from his voice in an instant, replaced by something heavier. Worn. Serious in a way that made the room feel smaller. Without another word, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick scroll. It was old. The edges frayed, the inkwork faded in places, but the seals engraved along its surface glowed faintly with the shimmer of a recent refresh, like someone had spent hours recharging the chakra layers just to preserve the contents. He held it out to her. Tsunade took it with a furrowed brow, her grip steady even as something colder settled in her chest. What is this? She asked. Jiraiya's voice was quieter now. Medical records. Naruto's. Everything they've kept on him in Konoha. Her eyes narrowed. How much is in here? His answer came without hesitation. 12 years. Her breath caught. The words echoed in her ears. 12 years. Her fingers tightened around the scroll. It felt heavier now, not just physically, but spiritually. Like it carried the weight of every moment she hadn't been there. Every scar no one had healed. Every failure they had let stack up on the shoulders of a child. 12 years, she repeated, the number scraping at the back of her throat like broken glass. Yep, Jiraiya said, his tone grim. They kept everything. Even the stuff they thought no one would ever look at. Tsunade didn't speak. Not immediately. With a flick of her fingers, she unsealed the scroll. There was a soft crack of chakra discharge, and a thick folder slid free, heavy with embedded seals and protective layers. The top sheet bore a single glowing kanji. Man. Full. Like a warning. Like a verdict. She didn't open it. Not yet. She just stared, the paper trembling ever so slightly in her hands. Across the room, Shizune's gaze had drifted to the boy. Naruto. He was currently lying on his stomach on the plush rug, legs swinging lazily behind him as he poked at the edge of the fabric with a kind of focused curiosity, like the weave might be some kind of puzzle. He looked up at the sound of his name. He asked, blinking. Naruto. Shizune asked gently, her voice softer now. She wasn't interrogating, just searching. Studying him. He beamed at her like she'd just offered him a bowl of ramen. That's me. Naruto Uzumaki, he said brightly, grinning with all the confidence of someone who didn't know the sky was about to fall behind him. Shizune blinked. The name hit her like a ripple through still water. Uzumaki. Her breath hitched. So subtle she almost didn't notice it. Memories stirred. A whirl of crimson hair. A laugh loud enough to shake windows. A woman who had once run through the Hokage's office barefoot because she'd forgotten her shoes and hadn't cared. Kushina. Shizune's smile faltered, just slightly, as her eyes slid from Naruto to Tsunade. And for a moment, neither woman spoke. Because they both felt it now. That unmistakable weight. Naruto wasn't just a boy. He was a living reminder. Of promises made. Of people lost. Of a village that had let too much slip through the cracks. Tsunade's eyes hadn't left the folder. But her jaw tightened. Her shoulders squared. She was already building a list. Tsunade hadn't said a word. But her face said everything. Her honey brown eyes, usually so sharp, so steady, had gone wide. Locked on Naruto with a look that was something between shock and devastation. The open scroll lay across her lap, the parchment unrolled but unread beyond the first few pages. Her fingers hovered above the surface, trembling faintly, as if she wasn't sure whether to keep reading or set the whole thing on fire. The silence was thick, heavy, pressed into every corner of the room like a warning. Shizune's eyes flicked between them, hermetic instincts prickling. Lady Tsunade, she asked carefully. What's wrong? But Tsunade didn't answer. Her gaze was pinned to the records, scanning, reading, absorbing. With every line, Her expression changed. The disbelief gave way to something colder. More dangerous. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her brows drew tight. Her breath came sharp through her nose. Naruto, oblivious to the war building behind her eyes, let out a small sigh and scratched the back of his head. It's probably just my medical records, he said, voice oddly casual. Like it was routine. Like he'd long since stopped expecting people to react any differently. Jiraiya-sensei said you'd want to look at them. He said he doesn't trust anyone else to do a real checkup. Not just the physical stuff, but. He tapped the side of his head. What's going on up here, too? His smile followed a beat later. Small, lopsided, fragile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. And that, somehow, broke something inside her. Tsunade's eyes snapped up from the scroll, locking onto him. This, she said, and her voice cracked. Just a little. This is just his first year. The fury in her tone was quiet, but suffocating. Like the moment right before thunder. Shizune stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. Her breath hitched. 38 assassination attempts, she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. Multiple fractures, untreated concussions, broken fingers, chronic malnutrition. Staff negligence. She looked up, pale. That's criminal. Tsunade's hands were trembling now as she gripped the edges of the scroll. That's Minato's orphanage. Her voice cracked again, but this time, it wasn't from sorrow. It was rage. He built that place himself. After the Third War, it was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. How did this happen under our noses? In his own village. The words weren't directed at anyone. Not exactly. But they cut through the room like blades. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He just stared at the carpet, his expression unreadable, his voice quiet. Yeah, he said softly. That sounds about right. There was no bitterness in it. No anger. Just a quiet resignation that didn't belong in a boy his age. Shizune looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the scars that didn't show. The kind you couldn't heal with chakra. Jiraiya stood off to the side, arms crossed, his usual teasing gone. His face was carved from stone. And that's just year one, he said quietly. I only made it to his 10th birthday. It doesn't get better. It gets worse. The room fell still. Tsunade's grip shifted. She slammed the folder shut with a snap loud enough to make Tun-Tun flinch. The sound echoed like a slap across stone. She closed her eyes, her shoulders rising with a deep breath she didn't release for several seconds. Her fists curled atop the scroll, knuckles white with pressure. The rage was there, growing, coiling like a serpent beneath her ribs. It wasn't explosive, not yet, but it was rising. Slow and sharp, the kind of fury that built in silence and ended in ruin. They let this happen. In Minato's village. To Kushina's child. When she opened her eyes again, they were dry, but they burned. Her thoughts were a tangle of names and faces, some beloved, some bitter. Minato, Kushina, Nawaki, and now, Naruto. But the ones that twisted deepest weren't the dead. They were the ones still alive. Makoto. Her name surfaced in Tsunade's mind like acid, the syllables tasting like betrayal. Where the hell were you? You were supposed to be Kushina's closest friend, her confidant. If anyone knew Kushina's wishes, it would have been you. You had to know. She would have made you godmother. She would have trusted you with his life. And yet, nothing. No protection. No whisper of intervention. Just silence. And then, Tsume. The name struck like a blade through memory. You two were inseparable in the academy. The infamous pair, Kushina and Tsume, Storm and Fang. She loved you like a sister. And you let this happen. You all let it happen. Her fingers curled into fists atop the scroll. Trembling, white-knuckled, she reached for the sake bottle on the low table beside her with sharp, jerking motion. The cup filled too fast, sloshing slightly over the edge. She didn't care. She downed it in one gulp. The burn tore through her throat, harsh and unrelenting. But it couldn't drown the fury. Couldn't silence the roaring in her ears. Still, she said nothing. Because if she spoke now, if she gave voice to the chaos building inside, she wasn't sure if she'd scream or cry. So she stared at the wall, at nothing, her expression unreadable, her emotions not. Jiraiya waited. He didn't interrupt. He knew better than to fill silence that heavy with words. Finally, her voice came, low, tight, coiled like a spring on the verge of snapping. What do you want me to do? Jiraiya exhaled softly, some small knot of tension in his chest loosening. She hadn't thrown the sake bottle at him, or punched him through the wall. She was furious, rightfully, but she was still listening. That was enough. For now, I need you to give him a full evaluation, he said, his voice stripped of its usual playfulness. Everything. Physical, mental, chakra structure, brainwave patterns, bones, nerves, muscle damage, memory resilience. All of it. He paused, watching her carefully. Fix what you can. And if you find something you can't. His eyes hardened. Tell me. No sugarcoating. No protecting me from the fallout. I want the truth. Tsunade's gaze slowly shifted back to him, sharp and unreadable. Her fingers tapped once, twice, on the table beside the scroll. How long? 1 month, Jiraiya said. Maybe 6 weeks. Depends on when the intel hits. She arched a brow. Intel. I've got a deep cover report coming in, he said, his voice quieter now. One of my spies is pulling something from underground, black market chakra trafficking. Organs. Stolen jutsu scrolls. Root level corruption. Tsunade's eyes narrowed. That the reason you can't take him with you? Jiraiya nodded. It's too dangerous. I'd rather be able to move fast. I can't afford to be distracted. And, he hesitated, just briefly, he's not ready. Her brow lifted slightly, but she didn't push. Not yet. She leaned back in the chair, the old wood creaking faintly under her weight as she studied him across the quiet space. The bottle sat between them, the records curled at the edge of the table like a wound still waiting to be opened. She said nothing. Not yet. But in her silence, she was weighing everything: Naruto's smile, the bruises in the file, the names of people she once trusted, and the weight of a promise not yet spoken. You're sure about this? Tsunade asked at last, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. Leaving him with me. Her eyes flicked toward Naruto, who was still hugging the carpet like it had answers, the scroll resting in front of him like a newly discovered artifact. You do realize I'll probably have to skip town again in a few days. I know, Jiraiya said with a slow nod. But Naruto's got the summoning contract now. I can track him anywhere, and you, if it comes to that. Tsunade sighed and closed her eyes, dragging a hand through her blonde hair, fingers nodding briefly in frustration before slipping free. Fine, she muttered, voice lined with reluctant acceptance. But you owe me for this, Jiraiya. Big time. His grin was weary, but it reached his eyes. Anything you want. Tsunade cracked one eye open and raised a brow. Careful what you promise. I mean it, he said, and this time there was no grin, no deflection, just quiet sincerity. Anything. She crossed her arms again, her posture relaxing just slightly. The glint in her eye wasn't soft exactly, but it wasn't sharp either. It was something in between. Familiar. Old. A warning. And a reminder. And Jiraiya understood it without needing it said. There was a silence then, brief, but full. A moment passing between two people who had survived far too much, lost too many, and still managed to stand in the same room without shattering. Then Jiraiya turned. Naruto. The boy looked up immediately, alert and ready. Jiraiya reached into the folds of his coat and pulled out a smaller scroll bound in red thread, worn but clean. He flicked it over with casual ease, but his expression was anything but light. Here, kiddo. This has everything I want you to work on while I'm gone. Training schedules, chakra drills, some notes on what you still suck at. Naruto huffed. And a beginner's guide to Fuinjutsu, Jiraiya finished with a grin. Naruto's eyes went wide. Really? He breathed, already clutching the scroll like it was made of gold. You're actually letting me learn sealing stuff. Don't make it sound like I've been hiding the secrets of the universe from you, Jiraiya said, ruffling his hair. You weren't ready before. You are now. The words hit harder than they should have. Ready. Not a burden. Not a mistake. Ready. Naruto's back straightened, hands tightening around the scroll with quiet reverence. I won't slack off. I promise. I'll get stronger. Jiraiya crouched down slightly in front of him, voice dropping into something gentler. And remember, no training on Sundays. Naruto blinked. Huh, I mean it, Jiraiya said. That's your day off. Rest. Eat something good. Sleep in. Pull a harmless prank if you want. Recharge. You burn out, you break. Naruto stared at him, and slowly nodded. Okay. He sounded surprised. Like no one had ever told him it was okay to stop trying. Just for one day. Jiraiya pulled Naruto into a brief, firm hug, one arm slung around his shoulders with all the quiet weight of everything unsaid. It wasn't long, just a moment. But it was enough. Take care, brat, he murmured near his ear. I'll be back before you know it. Naruto didn't say anything. He just nodded, the scroll pressed tightly to his chest like a promise. Jiraiya straightened and turned to Tsunade, his usual smirk replaced by something more grounded, earnest. He's in your hands now, he said. I trust you. Tsunade arched a brow, giving him a smirk that didn't quite hide the weight behind her own eyes. You're lucky I like kids. Otherwise, this would have cost you a hell of a lot more. Jiraiya chuckled under his breath, gave one final look between the two of them, and then gone. In a whisper of wind and swirl of chakra, he vanished from the suite, leaving nothing but the faintest shimmer in the air behind him. The silence in his absence lingered for a moment. It stretched long and thin, like the quiet after thunder, when the world is still waiting to see what's left behind. Naruto stood frozen in place, the scroll still clutched in both hands. His eyes didn't move from the spot where Jiraiya had disappeared. Then, slowly, he turned. His gaze shifted to Tsunade, blue eyes steady but tinged with uncertainty now that the laughter had faded. The scroll lowered slightly in his grip, as if it had just begun to feel heavier. So, he said, quieter now. What happens next? Tsunade didn't answer right away. She studied him. Really studied him. The way his posture, though proud, was still too tense for someone his age. The way his knuckles stayed white where they gripped the scroll. That grin of his, cocky, confident, bright, it was armor. She recognized it now. She knew it. And she could see the cracks. He was a boy. Still a boy. Despite the chakra in his bones and the beast in his belly. Despite the weight of Konoha's blind neglect and Jiraiya's hopes. But he stood there, unflinching. Still ready. Tsunade's expression softened, just slightly. Now, she said gently, we start with that checkup. Her smirk returned then, sharper this time. Familiar and just a little wicked. And after that, we'll see just how tough you really are. That was all Naruto needed to hear. His grin returned full force, wide, cocky, and brimming with challenge. Bring it on, Granny Tsunade. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then the table beside her exploded. Granny, Tsunade roared, slamming her fist down with such force the wood cracked, split, and detonated into a spray of splinters and dust. Naruto yelped and stumbled back, laughing even as he ducked behind the nearest chair. It was a compliment. You're like a really strong, terrifying grandma. That's not better. Across the room, Shizune sighed, a long, world-weary sound, and opened the nearest cabinet with the practiced calm of someone who'd long accepted her life choices. She began pulling out antiseptics, chakra diagnostic tools, and a scroll packed with medical files, her motion smooth and efficient. Tun-Tun oinked softly from her side, as if in agreement. This is going to be a long month, Shizune thought, resigned but steady. And yet, a small, reluctant smile tugged at her lips. Maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be such a bad one either. Back in Konoha, the morning sun crept slowly over the tiled roofs of Konohagakure, its golden rays painting the village in warm hues of orange and gold. The sky was impossibly blue, as if the heavens themselves had decided to bless the day. To the ordinary eye, it was just another morning in the hidden leaf. But to those who lived there, to the merchants, the shinobi, the civilians, it felt different. Lighter. As though the village had been holding its breath for years, and now, finally, it could breathe. Naruto Uzumaki was gone. Children raced through the streets, their laughter louder than usual. Shopkeepers stood taller behind their stalls, calling out prices with newfound enthusiasm. Even the Anbu patrols seemed more relaxed, their eyes less guarded. Whispers filled the air like pollen in spring. Can you believe it? They finally sent him away. About time. Should have done it years ago. He's probably making some other village miserable now. The bitterness in their voices wasn't hidden, it was paraded like a badge of honor. An invisible weight had been lifted from their chests, and they wore their relief openly. To them, the boy with the whiskered cheeks and sun-bright hair had been nothing more than a walking curse. A reminder of a night soaked in blood and flame. A reminder of what they had lost. In the market square, a celebration of sorts had quietly erupted the night before. Nothing official, of course, no banners, no fireworks, but the joy was unmistakable. Bottles of sake had been passed around. Laughter spilled from taverns. Even the usually stoic shinobi guards had allowed themselves smirks. The demon brats finally gone, someone had declared, glass raised high. The cheer that followed was loud, almost cathartic. But not everyone joined in. Beneath the laughter, behind the clinking of cups and smug toasts, there were whispers, darker ones. He was born the night the Nine Tails attacked, wasn't he? You think the Hokage lied to us? Covered something up. I heard he doesn't even know. The rumors spread like oil on water, quick, uncontrollable, and dangerous. The Hokage's decree, the one forbidding any discussion of Naruto's origins, had kept the truth buried for years. But with the boy no longer in sight, the fear that once muzzled tongues began to fade. And that was a mistake. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the aging third Hokage, had ruled for decades with a deceptively gentle hand. But he was no fool. And he had not grown old in a world of ninja by being soft. The first body was found 2 days later. A minor clerk who'd bragged too loudly after too much sake. Found slumped over his desk, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted. No sign of struggle, no forced entry. Just gone. The second, a retired shinobi, was found with his head against the wall. The blood had dried into the grain of the wood. Neighbors said he'd been ranting in the streets just the night before. The message was clear, though never spoken aloud. Some silences are sacred. Break them, and you break yourself. And so, the village fell quiet again, but not out of respect. Out of fear and confusion. The hate they had poured so freely into the boy's absence now curdled in their hearts. They didn't understand what was happening. They never had. And so, as always, they blamed the only thing they could. Naruto. Even in his absence, he was the scapegoat, the poison in the well, the darkness under their beds. The streets below bustled with forced cheer, merchants shouting louder than usual, children playing louder than necessary, shinobi moving with feigned normalcy. It was as if the whole village had agreed to pretend. Pretend that everything was fine. Pretend that nothing was missing. Pretend that Naruto Uzumaki had never existed. His departure had been announced quietly, a long-term assignment, the council said. A mission far from the village, supervised by a senior shinobi. No details. No fanfare. Just absence. And the village exhaled. It wasn't relief they felt. No, it was something deeper. A kind of ugly satisfaction. Like a wound that had festered for too long had finally been cut away. The whispers came first, and then the open laughter. Cheers broke out in the marketplace the moment the news spread. Stalls closed early. Bottles were passed around. Toasts made. The demons finally gone, they said. Good riddance. We're finally safe. It wasn't official, but it might as well have been a festival. But when joy ran dry, as it always did, something else crept in. Restlessness. Discontent. The kind that festers in people who've built their comfort on hate. And with the boy gone, with no one left to sneer at on the streets, they needed something else. So they turned their eyes to what was left of him. His footprint, his scent, his home, a cramped, lonely apartment tucked between two rusting buildings at the edge of the residential district. The one everyone avoided but always noticed. Its windows had long since stopped glowing at night. Its door no longer creaked open before sunrise as Naruto sprinted out in a blur of orange. It was a ghost house now. Empty, unattended, but not untouched. The fire started just before dawn 3 days ago. The official report named it an accident, a faulty wire, maybe a stove left on. Something mundane, something forgivable, but everyone knew better. The neighbors didn't hear an explosion. They didn't smell gas. There was no cry for help. Just smoke, thick and black, curling into the sky like a signal, no, a warning. And then the flames swallowed it whole. By morning, all that remained were charred walls and cracked concrete. Ash fluttered through the air like snow. The landowner stood at the edge of the wreckage with a smile too smooth and excuses too well rehearsed. Necessary renovation, he told the press. We'll build something cleaner, brighter. The villagers clapped, cheered, even. A fresh start, they called it. They moved on with disturbing ease. No memorial, no moment of silence. No one bothered to check what possessions might have remained inside. No one asked where he might have gone or if he'd ever come back. To most of them, Naruto Uzumaki had never been more than a stain. Now scrubbed clean. And so the village pretended once more. Pretended he had never lived there at all. But not everyone forgot. Not everyone looked away. Training Ground 7, once a place of cautious teamwork and grudging progress, had descended into a battlefield of sheer chaos and barely contained tempers. What used to be structured sparring and teamwork drills was now a daily reenactment of a three-way civil war. The harmony was gone. In its place, screaming. Lots of it. Sakura Haruno's voice cracked across the clearing like a kunai thrown at Mach speed. Sigh. You baka. Get down here and take your punishment like a man. Her fury was unfiltered, raw, and loud enough to scare birds out of nearby trees. She charged forward, fists clenched so tight her knuckles looked like they were trying to escape her skin. Her face was beet red, not from training, but from the overwhelming urge to commit murder. High above, perched on a thick branch like the world's most annoying pigeon, Sai reclined with all the grace of someone who knew he was untouchable. Legs swinging, back against the trunk, that same artificial smile glued to his face like he'd bought it at the discount emotion store. Punishment, he echoed, tilting his head innocently. Haruno, I must decline. You strike like an enraged farm animal. Frankly, I'm concerned you might be a man. With your lack of feminine assets, it's becoming difficult to tell. That was it. Sakura's scream shattered the air. Somewhere in the distance, a window cracked. Probably unrelated. Maybe not. Her fists hit the ground hard enough to leave divots in the dirt. You're dead, you ink-smelling twig. Meanwhile, not too far away, Kiba Inuzuka, mid-spar with Shino, froze as the sound reached them like a banshee's war cry. He flinched, dropping into a crouch and slapping his hands over his ears. What the hell is going on over there? Akamaru barked once in agreement, then immediately whimpered and tried to crawl into Kiba's hoodie. Back in the tree, Sai raised a finger to his lips, mock thoughtful. Are you deaf now, too? How unfortunate. It seems your own screeching has rendered you partially incapacitated. A medical issue, perhaps. You should see a healer before your brain leaks out of your ears. Sakura's response was another shriek, raw, guttural, and very nearly demonic, as she launched herself up the tree like a woman possessed. Leaves scattered in her wake, fluttering down like the forest itself was backing away from the unfolding disaster. Her hands were already curled into fists, chakra flickering along her knuckles in warning. Murder was not just a possibility. It was the plan. Sai, still perched like some smug little bird, barely flinched. With practiced ease, he sidestepped to another branch, gliding from one to the next like he had all the time in the world, and none of the survival instinct. That smile, fake, frozen, infuriating, never left his face. Such hostility, he said, with all the detached interest of someone observing a mildly inconvenient weather pattern. Perhaps menopause is affecting your mood swings. Silence. Dead silence. Even the birds stopped chirping. Somewhere in the distance, a squirrel dropped the acorn it was holding and fled the scene. Sakura made a noise that no human throat was meant to produce. What? Her face went a color scientists had yet to name. Whether it was embarrassment, unholy wrath, or chakra-induced combustion was anyone's guess. But the next second, she exploded off the branch like a missile, fists glowing and aimed squarely at Sai's smug face. She wasn't going to hit him. She was going to delete him from existence. Meanwhile, on the far side of Training Ground 7, another storm was brewing, quieter, but no less volatile. While Sakura roared threats up a tree and Sai calmly invited death with every word, Sasuke Uchiha moved like a blade with a cracked edge, sharp, dangerous, and just a little off. He threw himself into the sparring match with the full force of his frustration, fists slicing through the air with speed and power. But it was wild, unfocused. Every strike carried more anger than precision, more desperation than control. Around them, the training field swayed gently in the breeze. Tall grass rustled, trees whispered, and the sky above glowed soft with the afternoon sun. But there was no peace here, not for him. Not when the void still lingered where Naruto used to stand. Sasuke's foot slammed into the ground as he launched forward again, muscles coiled tight with purpose. I have to be faster. Stronger. His mind echoed with the same looping thought, over and over like a curse. I can't fall behind. Not to him. Not again. But Kakashi was water. Fluid. Cold. Effortless. He moved like he wasn't even trying, slipping around Sasuke's attacks with the grace of experience. Where Sasuke was all jagged fire and wounded pride, Kakashi was cool silence and measured rhythm. Too slow, the Jonin murmured, barely audible, just before he ducked beneath another punch and countered with a flick of his wrist, a jab to the side, just enough to knock the air from Sasuke's lungs. Sasuke stumbled, his footing shaky, sweat gluing his shirt to his skin. His breath came fast, shallow, angry. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He shot forward again, jaw clenched, fists tighter. His heart pounded like a war drum, echoing the bitter mantra burning in his head. Stronger, stronger, stronger. Kakashi exhaled quietly, almost like a sigh, and stepped aside once more. His legs swept out, low and sharp. Sasuke's feet left the ground for half a second before his back met the dirt with a solid thud. Dust puffed up around him in a choking cloud. That's 10 for me, Kakashi said, brushing his hands together, voice dry and detached. 0 for you. Take a break, Sasuke. You're overthinking every move, it's making you sloppy. But Sasuke barely heard him. The world felt distant, muted beneath the roar of failure ringing in his ears. He pushed himself up slowly, arms shaking. Dirt clung to his hands, his knees. His bangs hung low, shadowing his eyes. But when he looked up, those eyes burned. Not with shame, not with sadness, with fury. I can't stop, he rasped. His voice was hoarse, tight, and low. I need to get stronger. I have to. His voice cracked at the end, just slightly, just enough. But he swallowed it down, masked it with clenched fists and the iron-hard set of his jaw. Behind him, Sakura's shrieks rang through the air again, followed by the splintering sound of a tree branch snapping. Sai's laugh echoed faintly. Kakashi glanced over his shoulder, sighed, and muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, I should have stayed in bed. But his gaze returned to Sasuke, and for a moment, just a moment, there was something in Kakashi's lone visible eye. Not judgment, not annoyance, worry. Because the fire in Sasuke's gaze, it was too familiar. It was the same look he'd once seen in another boy, long ago, before everything burned. From across the field, Sakura's voice cut through the rising tension like a kunai through paper. Sasuke-kun, you can do it. One more time. She had paused her pursuit of Sai just long enough to cheer, her voice ringing with blind, unshakable devotion, like nothing in the world could shake her belief in the boy dragging himself across the dirt like a vengeance-fueled corpse. High above, lounging atop the tallest branch like a predatorless cat, Sai tilted his head. One leg swung lazily beneath him, his brush tucked behind one ear like some twisted parody of an artist at peace. He peered down at Sakura with detached curiosity. Is she suffering from some undiagnosed condition? He mused, watching her whiplash between homicidal rage and dreamy encouragement with clinical detachment. Bipolar disorder. Hormonal imbalance. He made a quiet mental note to include the observation in his next report to Danzo. Haruno. Emotionally unstable. Prone to mood swings. Potential liability to team cohesion. He could already hear the faint sound of Danzo's dry approval, like a ghost coughing behind an eye patch. Down below, Kakashi exhaled long and slow, reaching up to pinch the bridge of his nose. A dull ache bloomed behind his Sharingan eye, not from any jutsu, not from the sparring. Just from this. All of it. The noise. The chaos. The sheer unrelenting absurdity of watching his team fall apart one scream and ego at a time. His gaze shifted to Sasuke, who was forcing himself upright again with the grim determination of someone who didn't know how to stop. His feet dragged slightly as he returned to the center of the field, fists tight, shoulders squared, like a soldier too stubborn to admit he was bleeding. But Kakashi wasn't watching his form. Not really. His eye flicked instinctively to the spot where Naruto used to stand. Off balance. Loud. Persistent. A whirlwind of optimism and dumb courage who somehow held them together by sheer force of will. That space now felt hollow. Like a page had been torn out of a familiar story, and no one dared to look at the gap. This team's a mess, Kakashi thought, not unkindly, just tired. Sasuke's unraveling, Sakura's emotionally compromised, and Sai. His eye lifted to the tree again, where Sai still lounged, likely contemplating whether human emotion was contagious. Sigh is sigh. He sighed again, deeper this time, and turned the page of his mental resignation letter. His mind, traitorously, drifted back to that moment. To Naruto's voice, raw, wounded, brittle with anger. You got what you wanted, Kakashi-sensei. You can focus on Sasuke now. The words echoed like the slow toll of a distant bell, hollow and inescapable. They had caught him off guard, not because Naruto was wrong, no, that was the worst part. He'd been right. Kakashi hadn't answered then. He couldn't. Not with anything honest. Because hearing it spoken aloud had stung more than he wanted to admit. Like being caught in a lie he'd never meant to tell. He blinked, trying to shake the memory loose. Sasuke, take a break. His voice came out sharper than intended, no longer the lazy, half-interested drawl, but a command. Sasuke didn't even hesitate to argue. I don't need a break. He was panting now, every breath shallow, ragged. The Sharingan spun in his eyes, fast and frenzied, red against white like a storm building behind glass. Kakashi's gaze narrowed, steel beneath the cloth. That's an order, not a suggestion. Silence stretched. For a second, Sasuke didn't move, his entire frame pulled taut like a bowstring, as if disobedience was coiled just beneath the skin. But slowly, reluctantly, his muscles eased. He stepped back, face tight, lips drawn in a snarl he didn't bother to voice. His fists clenched until his knuckles cracked. Then he dropped to the ground with a rough exhale, elbows on his knees, drenched in sweat and silent rage. His head stayed low, not out of shame, but because the frustration was a storm, and if he looked up, it would spill out of him like lightning. No matter how hard he pushed himself, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. He could almost feel the space beside him where Naruto used to stand, loud, annoying, infuriatingly persistent. Across the clearing, Sakura finally gave up her pursuit, stomping back toward the others with twigs in her sleeves, leaves knotted in her hair, and murder still glinting faintly in her eyes. Her fists were clenched, her scowl firmly in place, until she saw him. Sasuke. Sitting on the ground, sweat slicked, eyes dark and distant. And just like that, the fire drained from her expression. The sharpness in her gaze softened, lips parting with something like breathless awe. "You're amazing, Sasuke-kun," she said, her voice dropping to that quiet, reverent tone she always reserved for him. "You're going to get so strong. I just know it." High above, Sai lay sprawled across a branch like a cat observing lesser beings. He tilted his head, the artificial curve of his smile unchanged, unblinking. "Ah," he said thoughtfully, as though logging notes into a mental journal, "the endless devotion of the Haruno species. Fascinating to observe, yet entirely unproductive." Sakura's head snapped up. "Shut up, Sai," she barked, her face turning bright red again, whether from fury, flustered embarrassment, or the general emotional whiplash of being her was anyone's guess. Sai merely blinked, unbothered, and resumed studying clouds with the detached serenity of someone who had no idea how close he was to a concussion. Kakashi, leaned against the trunk of a nearby tree, watched them all in silence. One hand in his pocket, the other lazily flipping his orange book shut. But he wasn't reading. His visible eye narrowed slightly. "This isn't working." Sai was a scalpel shoved into a wound still trying to close. He didn't understand the bonds that once tied this team together. Didn't feel them. Didn't even pretend to. And Sasuke. Kakashi's eye shifted, tracking the boy who now sat stiffly in the dirt, jaw clenched, eyes burning holes in the horizon. Sasuke wasn't just driven anymore. He was drowning. The thirst for power that once simmered beneath the surface had boiled over. It was no longer quiet. It was a riptide, and Sasuke wasn't swimming. He was letting it take him. And Sakura, Kakashi sighed, dragging a hand back through his silver hair. She's still chasing ghosts. The boy she saw in Sasuke, the gentle prodigy, the distant hero, the teammate who maybe, just maybe, would smile at her someday, that boy had been gone for a long time. She just hadn't realized it yet. "All right," Kakashi said at last, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade dulled by years of overuse. "That's enough for today. We'll regroup tomorrow. Go home. Rest." No argument followed. Sasuke didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge the words. His gaze stayed fixed somewhere beyond the tree line, staring at something only he could see. Or maybe nothing at all. Somewhere Kakashi couldn't reach. Sakura gave a small nod, but her eyes stayed on Sasuke, watching him like he might disappear if she blinked. Her mouth opened like she meant to say something, but whatever words she wanted wouldn't come. They never did. Sai dropped from his perch with the fluid grace of someone entirely disconnected from the tension he was walking into. He landed lightly, straightened, and casually dusted off his pants with a neat flick of his wrists. "This team is quite the circus, wouldn't you say, sensei?" he said cheerfully. That same glassy smile curved across his face, empty as ever. Sakura shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel, but she didn't bother replying. "Not worth it." Kakashi said nothing. He didn't move. His eye drifted toward the clearing again, settling on the fourth spot in their old formation. The one that used to be filled with orange and noise and too much talking. A blur of blue and gold and stubborn, reckless fire. That spot had been silent for weeks now. Maybe this team was broken from the start. Sakura trailed after Sasuke slowly, her sandals whispering through the grass. She kept a respectful distance, but not so far that she couldn't be heard. "Once Naruto Baka comes back to the village," she muttered, arms crossed tightly, "I'm going to kick his for leaving the team." The words came out annoyed more than anything, like Naruto's absence had inconvenienced her personally. Like she still didn't understand why he'd left. Sasuke didn't answer at first. His stride quickened. Barely, but the message was clear. He didn't want to talk. Not to her. Not now. Maybe not ever. "I don't care," he muttered finally, voice flat. Empty. And he didn't. Not about her complaints. Not about her overreactions, or the way she tried to pretend everything was normal when it wasn't. When it hadn't been for a long time. Her presence grated on him these days. Like a pebble in his shoe. He wasn't sure when it started. Maybe after the Bell test, maybe after their first mission. But ever since Naruto had left, it had only gotten worse. Without the idiot's noise to drown it out, everything else had become unbearable. Including her. He still remembered that first day. He hadn't meant to listen. Not really, but her voice had carried, just loud enough for the words to sink in like poison. Now that Naruto's finally gone, Sakura had whispered to Ino, the annoyance sharp in her tone, maybe Team 7 can actually function for once. He was always ruining everything. Always holding us back. She had laughed afterward. Soft. Smug. Sasuke had said nothing. Hadn't even flinched. At the time, he told himself he didn't care. But now the silence felt different. The echo of her words followed him long after her voice had faded. They clung to his thoughts like burrs, irritating and impossible to ignore. And though the anger still pulsed in him like a second heartbeat, it wasn't aimed at Naruto. Not anymore. It was envy. A deep, gnawing frustration that chewed away at him from the inside, slow, constant, merciless. Why him? Why had he, the dead last, been chosen? Why was Naruto the one Jiraiya had taken? Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, the legendary Sannin, the man who had taken an orphan, Minato Namikaze, and turned him into the Yellow Flash. A boy with nothing, who became everything. And now, history was repeating itself. Another orphan, another nobody. And Sasuke. Sasuke had Kakashi. Kakashi Hatake. An elite Jonin. A genius. Famous. Feared. Respected. But distant. Cold. He taught just enough to keep up the illusion of mentorship. Enough to say he tried. Enough to keep the team functioning. But never enough to satisfy the hunger gnawing at Sasuke's spine. Never enough to push him. He never looked at Sasuke the way Jiraiya looked at Naruto. Like he mattered. Like he was worth investing in. Sasuke's jaw clenched as he walked, hands shoved deep into his pockets, fingernails biting into his palms. He didn't need lectures. He didn't need distractions. He didn't need a teammate who tripped over his own feet or a girl who still followed him around like a puppy begging for scraps. He needed power. Real power. The kind Jiraiya was giving Naruto. The kind that made legends. And he'd find it. One way or another. Power waited for those bold, or desperate, enough to take it. And Sasuke was rapidly running out of reasons to wait. Behind him, Sai walked in silence, his steps light, unassuming. Observant. His dark eyes flicked to Sasuke's back. The Uchiha's posture was deceptively calm, shoulders squared, spine straight, but his movements were too controlled, too precise. The kind of restraint that came from holding back something volatile. But it was his eyes that told the truth. There was violence simmering there. Coiled beneath the surface like a blade waiting to be unsheathed. Cold. Growing darker with each step, each breath, each imagined slight. Danzo-sama was right to be concerned, Sai mused. His lips curved slightly into his practiced approximation of a smile, polite, hollow, empty. It's only a matter of time. Sasuke would seek out power, one way or another. And when Kakashi failed him, as he inevitably would, Sasuke would turn to someone who wouldn't. Whether that was Danzo, or an enemy of the village. Either way, he'll cross the line, Sai thought. His expression didn't change, but the thought that followed came like a whisper of steel. And when he does, he recalled the standing order. Quiet. Absolute. If Uchiha Sasuke betrays the village, he is to be eliminated on sight. Sai didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He'd accepted worse. The Uchiha was a variable. And variables didn't last long under Danzo's watch. The three continued down the path in tense, brittle silence. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch behind them like reaching hands. Sai's quarters were located near the outer edge of the old Uchiha compound. Logically, his presence made sense. His direction, His distance. But logic did nothing to soothe the irritation curling in Sakura's chest. She didn't say anything, but her arms were crossed tightly, her footsteps just a little sharper than before. She didn't trust Sai. She didn't like the way he looked at Sasuke, not with admiration, not even with rivalry. No, it was something colder. Like he was watching a ticking clock. Waiting for something to go off. Sakura rounded on him, eyes narrowed into slits. Her patience, already worn thin from the day's chaos, finally snapped. Why the hell are you following us, Sai Baka? Sai didn't even blink. He continued walking with the same casual stride, his smile plastered across his face like it had been drawn there with ink. My residence happens to be near Sasuke's apartment complex, he replied smoothly, tilting his head in that way he did when pretending to be curious. Besides, you do know he doesn't like you, right? The words hit like a senbon to the chest. Sakura froze mid-step, fury and embarrassment flashing hot across her face. Her hand twitched, fist trembling at her side, ready, so ready, to swing. But she didn't. Not because she didn't want to. But because it was pointless. Sai always dodged. Or worse, used that damn replacement technique. Last time she'd gone after him, he'd switched places with Sasuke mid-punch and. Her stomach twisted at the memory. She'd hit Sasuke. Right in the face. His perfect face. She still hadn't forgiven Sai for that. Honestly, she wasn't sure she ever would. Her grip tightened, knuckles going white. And then, just as she opened her mouth to snap back, an all too familiar voice rang out from across the street. Smug. Sharp. Unwelcome. Well. If it isn't Forehead Girl and her delusions. Sakura groaned audibly. Ino pig, she muttered through clenched teeth. And there she was. Ino Yamanaka. Arms full of fresh flowers, hair immaculate, smirk turned up to 11 as she strolled across the road with all the grace of someone who knew exactly how to press every single one of Sakura's buttons. Her eyes swept over the trio, and the smile faltered, just slightly. She had expected something. A splash of orange. A loud greeting. A ridiculous declaration of love shouted across the village square. But there was only silence. No Naruto. The street felt too still. Too quiet. And for the briefest moment, something shifted in Ino's expression. Not quite confusion. Not quite concern. Just a flicker of realization. Something, or someone, was missing. Where's the baka? Ino asked at last, folding her arms and scanning the street with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. I don't see him begging for Forehead Girl's attention anywhere. And where's Hinata? She usually tails him like a lovesick puppy. Sai took a step forward, his expression unchanged, still wearing that smile like a mask glued in place. Naruto-san has been removed from Team 7, he said plainly. He's joined Lord Jiraiya as his newest apprentice. I took his place. Ino blinked. Once. Twice. Then slowly turned her head, eyes flicking between Sai and Sasuke like she was trying to solve a math problem with no numbers. Excuse me, she said sharply, her voice barely rising above a hiss. Without warning, she reached out, grabbed Sakura by the collar, and yanked her bodily toward the nearest alley. We need to talk. Now. Neither Sasuke nor Sai even turned to look. Sai gave a faint shrug and continued walking, already scanning rooftops and corners for ideal surveillance points near Sasuke's apartment. He had work to do. Observation. Reporting. Quiet control. Sasuke didn't spare them a glance either. His mind was elsewhere. On seals, on speed, on strength. On power. Good, he thought. The less noise around him, the better. Meanwhile, in the shadowed alley. What the hell is wrong with you, pig? Sakura hissed, yanking her collar free and scowling as she straightened her shirt. I swear, you nearly dislocated my neck. Ino jabbed a finger at her, eyes blazing. Why the hell are you on a team with two absolute hotties? Do you even realize how unfair that is? Sakura blinked, caught off guard. Are you serious right now? Dead serious. Ino snapped. You've got Sasuke and this weirdly pretty mystery boy with no eyebrows, and I'm stuck babysitting Choji and Shikamaru. Sakura scoffed, folding her arms. Sigh, you're kidding. He's not hot. He's an asshole who keeps calling me a beast and a man. Ino blinked once, then promptly doubled over with laughter. He called you a man. She gasped, clutching her stomach. Oh my god. Her laughter echoed off the alley walls, full-bodied and merciless. Her shoulders shook as she leaned against the brick for support. Sakura's eye twitched. Dangerously. You're dead. Their foreheads collided with a loud crack, the sound echoing through the narrow alley. Guess he wasn't into your preteen boy body. Ino snickered, her smirk wicked. We have the same body type, dumbass. Sakura snapped back. Nope. Ino said smugly, lifting her chin. I actually have. Unlike you. Sakura's eyes narrowed to lethal slits. That's because you're getting fat. The insult landed like a slap. Within seconds, both girls had each other by the wrists, locked in a furious grapple. Foreheads slammed together in rhythmic thud-thud-thuds, neither willing to back down. Teeth gritted, feet dug into the dirt. It wasn't elegant, but it was war. And they were evenly matched. Not far from the chaos, the world moved at a different pace. Kurenai stood at the edge of the training field, arms folded loosely across her chest as the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting shifting shadows on the grass. In the center clearing, Kiba and Shino sparred in near silence. No insects, no chakra-enhanced strikes, no Kiba shouting half-formed insults. Just clean, controlled taijutsu. It was a deliberate choice. She designed the exercise to strip them of their usual tools, forcing them to focus on instinct, rhythm, and precision. And they rose to it, moving with a steady, grounded energy that spoke of quiet growth. But Kurenai's mind wasn't on the sparring. Her gaze drifted to the far edge of the field. Hinata sat quietly in the grass, legs folded neatly beneath her, fingers worrying the hem of her jacket sleeve with slow, nervous tugs. Her posture was hunched, defensive. But it wasn't just shyness. There was a weight to her that hadn't been there before. A soft sadness clung to her like morning mist, subtle, but unshakable. Her eyes didn't follow the match. They were distant, unfocused. As if she were watching something else. Someone else. Kurenai sighed and rubbed her chin, troubled. It had been just over a week since Naruto left with Jiraiya. And the shift in Hinata had been immediate. The light in her eyes dimmed. She still trained. Still smiled politely. But her heart, that was somewhere else. Far away. She didn't blame her. Naruto's departure had been abrupt, sudden and strangely silent, with no goodbyes and no warning. What came after made it even harder to process. His apartment, what little home he'd ever had burned. Reduced to ash and charred memories. Most of his belongings lost in the fire. And yet, Hinata had gone there. Quietly. Alone. Slipping through the smoke-stained ruins in search of anything that might remain. Anything she could carry back. She'd returned with two things. A pair of scratched, old goggles he used to wear back in the academy. And a half-burned red scarf. Kurenai had seen her working on it more than once, the scarf spread across her lap, her hands trembling slightly as she threaded a needle through its worn fabric. Like the act itself gave her something solid to cling to. Something that wouldn't slip away. A piece of him. A thread of hope. Kurenai exhaled gently and walked across the grass, her sandals whispering against the earth. Without a word, she sat down beside Hinata, folding her legs beneath her. He'll be back soon, she said, soft and warm, her voice like a calm breeze. Hinata startled at the sound, her head snapping up. Her eyes widened. Still doe-like, still shy, but there was a pink flush already rising to her cheeks. I know, she whispered. I just wish I could have seen him off. Her fingers rubbed the back of her head, brushing through strands of inky hair as her gaze dropped once more. Her voice wavered, fragile and sincere. Kurenai smiled faintly, eyes soft with understanding. From what I heard, she said, her tone dipping into quiet amusement, you might have seen him glaring daggers at his old sensei if you had. That gave Hinata pause. Her brows knit together, ever so slightly. A flicker of something sharp passed through her eyes at the word sensei. Brief, but unmistakable. Kurenai noticed it. It was subtle, but it was new. The kind of expression that didn't belong to the same girl who used to faint just hearing Naruto's name. It was something else now, something more aware. More steady. More determined. Kurenai reached out and gently patted the top of Hinata's head, her fingers brushing over silky dark hair. He'll be different when he returns, she said with a quiet chuckle. Stronger, for sure. Hopefully not more of a pervert than he already is. Hinata giggled softly, the sound light and delicate, like a small bell chiming in the fading light. Her hands drifted back to the half-mended scarf resting in her lap, fingers toying with the frayed edge. Her gaze dropped once more, and a soft blush crept into her cheeks. I'm pretty sure, Naruto-kun doesn't even know the difference between a man and a woman yet, she murmured, voice just above a whisper. Kurenai blinked. Huh, what makes you say that? Hinata hesitated, pressing her index fingers together, the classic sign. Nervous, embarrassed, but still willing to speak. Well, back in the academy, she began, pausing to gather her courage. When he used his sexy jutsu, there were always those cartoon clouds covering, certain places. Her blush deepened to a full bloom. I think, the only reason he made it like that, is because he's never actually seen the differences. They used to kick him out of class during, education. Kurenai's expression froze. Her eyes widened, slowly. Horrified understanding dawned in stages. Oh no. A cold shiver crept down her spine, settling like ice beneath her skin. He's alone. With Jiraiya. The same man who once tried to peep on the women's hot springs while delivering a lecture on chakra flow. The man who had at least 3 volumes of Ika Ika banned in multiple countries for moral indecency and questionable physics. The man who described himself as a research enthusiast, with a straight face. Naruto was out there with that man. Unsupervised. Oh no, Kurenai muttered under her breath, her face visibly paling. Kurenai-sensei. Hinata looked up, concern flickering in her soft voice. Her eyes were wide, worried, startled by the sudden shift in her teacher's demeanor. Kurenai blinked, then plastered on a smile far too cheerful to be believable. And nothing for your pretty head to worry about, she said brightly, waving it off with manic energy. But in her mind, a full-blown emergency protocol was already forming. I need to talk to Anko, Hana, Yugao, maybe even Sum. Every kunoichi in the village needed to be alerted. They would need meetings, coordination, training, defense drills. Because if Naruto Uzumaki returned as the second coming of the super-ultra pervert, they were all in danger. Okay, Hinata murmured, blinking uncertainly, though she seemed reassured by the forced smile. Kurenai nodded, far too quickly. Her eyes darted upward, scanning the rustling treetops like the sky might drop a warning at any second. A chill breeze passed through the leaves, brushing over her arms like a bad omen. Her lips pressed into a grim line. What kind of training is Jiraiya even putting him through? She wondered, crossing her arms tightly. Because if that man teaches Naruto a single perverted technique, I swear. I'm rounding up every kunoichi in Konoha and organizing an intervention. With weapons. The mental image hit her like a genjutsu gone wrong. Naruto, now taller and cockier, striking a pose midair, his sexy jutsu upgraded to a technique involving multiple shadow clones, sparkles, and the worst lines lifted straight from Ika Ika Paradise. Kurenai visibly shuddered. This wasn't training. This was corruption in real time. Meanwhile, far from Konoha, deep within a sun-dappled clearing surrounded by whispering trees. I'm not gonna eat those green things, Naruto declared, arms crossed and legs stubbornly folded beneath him like a gremlin in protest. He sat in the grass like someone being personally wronged by the very concept of nutrition, glaring at the plate in front of him like it was laced with poison. His nose wrinkled in dramatic disgust. They taste like sadness. Why can't I just have ramen? Shizune sighed through her nose, the tight smile on her face doing an admirable job of concealing the storm of inner screaming. 12. She reminded herself, eyes twitching. He's 12. Not 5. 12. She crouched beside him patiently, trying to channel every ounce of her nurse training into calm diplomacy. Naruto-kun, she said gently, you have to eat your vegetables. They're important for your development. Naruto scowled at the broccoli like it owed him money. And then he unleashed them. Those big, shimmering cerulean eyes. Eyes filled with manufactured heartbreak and weaponized cuteness. The puppy eyes of doom, a forbidden technique rumored to override reason, logic, and the will of even the strongest medic nin. Shizune faltered. Her fingers hovered over the plate. Her medical ethics wavered. Why does he look like a tiny baby fox? This is emotional warfare. I am a trained professional. I've seen battlefield trauma. This is not the hill I die on. And yet, her hand trembled. She was so close to giving in. Just a quick switch for a rice ball. Maybe a little soy sauce. A tiny compromise. Hold it. The voice cut through the clearing like a scalpel through stubborn stupidity. Cold. Sharp. Unimpressed. Shizune froze mid-reach. Naruto froze mid-pout. Both turned, slowly, like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Tsunade strode into view with all the gravitas of a battle-hardened medic prepared to wrestle an entire surgical team into obedience with a clipboard and a glare. Her eyes scanned the scene. Naruto sulking like a gremlin mid-tantrum, Shizune visibly cracking under the strain of emotional warfare. I knew it, Tsunade muttered, arms folding as she loomed like a storm front. You weren't prepared for the full might of the Uzumaki expression array. Shizune looked up guiltily, a weak laugh slipping from her lips. Lady Tsunade, I was just thinking maybe we could let him have something else. Something less vegetal. Tsunade stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head and it was quoting anti-vaccine pamphlets. Shizune, you were the one who pointed out his serum albumin levels were critically low, and that his micronutrient panel looked like a malnourished civet cat. Yes, but he's in a state of chronic undernutrition, Tsunade continued, voice sharp. His BMI is borderline cachectic. His calcium, magnesium, and iron reserves are so depleted I'm amazed he doesn't pass out every time he stands up too fast. Shizune winced. Okay. Yes, but. No buts. Tsunade jabbed a finger toward the untouched plate. That boy needs dietary rehabilitation with actual phytonutrients. Not sodium-laced noodles soaked in questionable broth with mysterious slabs of pork product. From his spot on the grass, Naruto blinked slowly. What's a phyto whatever? Can I summon it? No. Tsunade deadpanned. You chew it. Naruto slumped even deeper into the grass, cheeks puffed out like an offended squirrel refusing to cooperate with the laws of winter. Why can't I just have ramen with vegetables? He grumbled, forcing the last word out like it physically wounded him. He tried not to look green just saying it. Truth be told, Naruto had a history with vegetables, and not the good kind. The first time he'd eaten broccoli, he'd been bedridden for 2 days. Spinach twisted his stomach like a Chunin exam's trap room. Celery. That had been a betrayal on a cellular level. Every time, the symptoms were the same: nausea, vomiting, a high-grade fever, and a dramatic vow never to betray his taste buds again. He could go weeks in the dead of winter without catching so much as a sniffle, but one serving of peas, and he was writing his will in crayon. Vegetables, to Naruto Uzumaki, were punishment food. A sign from the universe that he was being targeted, an attempted assassination by chlorophyll. But he'd never told anyone that. Not Iruka. Not the Hokage. Definitely not a Yame Nichan at the ramen stand. She'd never look at him the same. Because, let's be honest, it sounded crazy. Across from him, Tsunade watched his expression twist and contort like he was reliving past trauma. And then, without warning, her gaze softened. Just for a moment. In the clearing, the boy sitting in front of her blurred, faded, and in his place, she saw a girl with wild, fiery red hair, cheeks puffed out in rebellion, violet eyes sparking with resistance. Face round with mischief. Stubborn to her core. Kushina. Tsunade bit back a laugh. Kami help me, she thought. He's just like her. Same scowl. Same cross-armed pout. Same mule-headed refusal to accept the treachery of healthy food. Shaking the memory loose, she schooled her expression into something unreadable and turned her back. Okay. Don't eat it, she said casually, shrugging as if it didn't matter in the slightest. Shizune nearly choked. Her head snapped toward Tsunade so fast it was a miracle her spine didn't audibly crack. Lady Tsunade, she gasped, eyes wide. What about the micronutrients? What happened to the intervention protocol? But Naruto's ears perked. Like a fox hearing the crinkle of a treat bag. He blinked up at Tsunade, eyes narrowed suspiciously. Wait, really? Sure, Tsunade said over her shoulder, already walking off with a smug little smirk. Just don't blame me when you stay a shorty for the rest of your life. No veggies, no height. That's how it works. Naruto froze. Completely. His brain short-circuited. And then, what? The cry echoed through the clearing like an ancient jutsu activation. Trees rattled. Birds scattered in a panic. Somewhere in the distance, a squirrel lost its grip and plummeted to the forest floor. Naruto scrambled to his feet, gripping the broccoli like it had just declared itself the final boss of his arc. Wait. Hold on, wait a second. He yelped, voice rising. That's not true, right? Right, Shizune. He turned to her, eyes wide with soul-shattering dread, the kind of look kids give when they realize Santa Claus isn't real, and all the presents came from stressed-out, budget-conscious ninja with back pain and a gambling problem. Shizune blinked. Oh no, he was already halfway to spiraling. She hesitated, but then gave him a gentle smile, her voice as soft as a kunai to the heart. Actually, it's kind of true, Naruto-kun. Proper nutrition, especially during development, does affect growth. Height included. The light in Naruto's eyes died a little. He stared at her. Then slowly, very slowly, looked down at himself, as if only now realizing his legs barely cleared the grass. Tsunade, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing, leaned in with an overly sweet smile. But hey, don't feel bad, she cooed. You can still be Hokage. The shortest Hokage in history, sure, but hey, maybe they'll build you a little step stool for the ceremonies. Naruto groaned, rubbing the back of his scalp like he could physically scrub the image out of his brain. TCH, fine, he muttered, the words thick with reluctant doom. The tone of a man signing a peace treaty with a nation he very much wanted to punch. I'll eat the stupid thing. He dropped to the ground with a dramatic flop, the bento box landing in his lap like it weighed 1,000 tons. Gripping the chopsticks with exaggerated dread, he hovered over a piece of broccoli as though it were laced with explosive tags. Tsunade and Shizune exchanged smug, victorious looks. For a second. Then his fingers started to tremble. Just a little. But if I start getting sick again, he murmured, the words low and quieter now, it's your fault. Tsunade blinked. Her smirk faltered. Huh. Shizune frowned, concern slipping in. Naruto, what do you mean again? He didn't look up. Didn't lift his gaze from the vegetables. His voice was flat, distant. Back at the orphanage, he said, almost like he was just remembering it himself. They used to make me eat all the vegetables. No matter what. The other kids didn't have to, but they'd watch me. Make sure I ate every bite. His grip tightened around the chopsticks. Afterward, I always got sick. Real sick. Fever. Throwing up. Stomach pain so bad I couldn't move sometimes. One time I threw up blood for an entire day. He let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. But there was no humor in it. Thought it was normal back then. The clearing fell silent. Tsunade's smile vanished. Shizune's breath hitched. And just like that, the pieces snapped into place. This wasn't a food intolerance. This wasn't picky eating. It was poisoning. And Naruto's expression, that quiet, hollow resignation, wasn't because of broccoli. It was the look of someone who had stopped expecting to be believed a long time ago. Tsunade's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening as a storm gathered behind her golden gaze. Poisoning a child. Repeated exposure. And no one caught it. No one said a word. Her fists clenched at her sides. Shizune crouched beside Naruto, her hand light on his shoulder, gentle but firm. Naruto-kun, she said softly, you don't ever have to eat anything that makes you feel sick. Not until we run some tests. Okay. He blinked at her, almost surprised, then gave a slow, uncertain nod. Tsunade stepped forward, her voice low, calm, and cold as steel. And after that, she said, we're going to find out exactly who fed you that poison. She smiled. But there was nothing kind in it. And believe me, her voice dropped, full of quiet wrath, they'll wish they'd never been born. He sat cross-legged on the grass, holding his now empty bento box in his lap. Grilled fish, white rice, miso soup, and even a variety of vegetables had been neatly packed inside, thanks to Shizune, of course. The odd, dark green drink she insisted he finish had been less appetizing, but he downed it anyway, grimacing through every gulp. Still, his stomach was full. His body sore. And strangely, he felt good. No more orphanage food, he thought, stretching his arms overhead with a quiet groan. This actually feels like something real. Like I'm not just surviving anymore. He pushed himself up, cracked his neck, then brought his hands together in a familiar cross-shaped seal. In a faint puff of smoke, 4 shadow clones appeared around him, all exact copies, but each with a purpose. From the side, Shizune watched with quiet interest while Tsunade arched an eyebrow, her arms folded loosely as she leaned back against a tree. Naruto pointed at the clones with a commanding nod. Alright, guys, you know what to do. The clones didn't speak. They just nodded, then split off without hesitation. One sprinted toward the thickest tree in the clearing, already focusing chakra into his feet as he began walking vertically up its bark, step after steady step. Another clone darted into the trees, moving between branches with surprising fluidity as he began placing tiny targets in various positions. Without missing a beat, he pulled out kunai and started launching them while on the move, his trajectory constantly changing in speed and direction. A third clone dropped into a basic taijutsu stance, beginning to cycle through slow, deliberate movements, correcting posture with each repetition. The fourth knelt on the grass, laying out scrolls, a brush, and a bottle of ink. His brow furrowed as he carefully traced kanji onto the parchment, adjusting strokes when they looked even slightly off. Tsunade's sharp gaze lingered on the one copying kanji. So he's refining his brushwork. Prepping for proper seal writing. She gave a quiet hum of approval. Smart. Clumsy handwriting leads to sloppy fuinjutsu. And sloppy fuinjutsu gets people blown up. The real Naruto, meanwhile, reached down and began strapping weights to his arms and legs. He tightened the weighted vest over his torso with a grunt, then set off at a light jog, circling the wide perimeter of the training grounds. The rhythm of his footsteps was uneven at first, but soon evened out, his body already adapting to the resistance. Tsunade sank down onto the grass beside Shizune with a quiet exhale, her legs folding beneath her. Huh, she muttered, eyes still tracking the boy. Guess Jiraiya finally explained shadow clone memory feedback to him. Shizune nodded, resting her chin in her palm. He's using it well, organizing his clones for specific tasks. Training efficiency like that doesn't come naturally to most genin. Or most shunin, Tsunade added dryly. Across the clearing, Shizune cupped her hands around her mouth and called out, "Hey, Naruto-kun." 5 heads turned simultaneously. The original, she clarified. 4 clones immediately returned to their tasks. Yeah, Naruto replied, still jogging, his voice carrying through heavy breaths. Don't use chakra to reinforce your body while you run. Make it harder. Naruto gave a quick nod, adjusting his pace. Got it. Tsunade and Shizune watched in silence for a moment as the clone practicing tree walking moved steadily up and down the wide trunk, adjusting chakra output with careful precision. Tsunade leaned back against the trunk of a nearby tree, arms crossed beneath her chest as she watched the clones work. There was something hypnotic about it, each one moving with purpose, focused and driven. It was organized chaos, but the kind born of discipline, not desperation. She found herself impressed. Jiraiya didn't just hand him a scroll and call it a day. He actually prepared him. That alone spoke volumes. Meanwhile, the Naruto jogging laps, now drenched in sweat, gritted his teeth as his legs started to burn. Without chakra reinforcing his muscles, each step became more grueling. His breath came in short, strained gasps, but he didn't slow down. Gotta get stronger, he thought, biting down hard on the inside of his cheek. 6 weeks. When Pervy Sage comes back, I'm gonna show him I'm not the same idiot he left behind. His stamina's insane, Shizune murmured, watching him with admiration. He hasn't even taken a break. Tsunade nodded. That's the Uzumaki bloodline for you. Stubborn as hell. But his form's improving. And that clone working on calligraphy, he's not just doodling, he's studying the structural flow. That's advanced prep for sealing. Shizune blinked. But that's at least Chunin level Fuinjutsu. Exactly, Tsunade said, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. He's already pushing himself past what the academy even dreams of teaching. Good. They sat in silence for a while longer, broken only by the distant thud of kunai against bark and the sound of Naruto's increasingly labored breathing. Then came a yell, sharp, startled, and high-pitched. Gah! Tsunade's head snapped up just as the clone practicing tree walking fell from halfway up the trunk and landed on his back with a dull thud. Ow! He groaned, blinking up at the sky. Shizune winced. Guess that one overdid it. No pain, no gain, Tsunade said, waving a hand dismissively as the clone poofed into a cloud of smoke. The original Naruto stumbled mid-step, eyes briefly widening as the memory of the fall slammed into his mind. OW, okay, that one hurt, he muttered, shaking his head as he pushed on. Thanks for the heads up, me. Tsunade let out a low chuckle. He's learning. And more importantly, he's not quitting. She stood, cracking her knuckles one by one with deliberate calm. All right. Break's over. Time to apply a little pressure. Shizune glanced at her warily. Oh no. What are you planning now? Tsunade grinned. That slow, wicked kind of grin that made seasoned shinobi flinch on instinct. Oh, nothing much. Just reminding him that training under a Sannin comes with expectations. The clearing echoed with the steady beat of Naruto's footsteps, his breathing ragged and fast, sweat trailing down his face in rivers. The weights strapped to his arms and legs dragged at every step like anchors, but he didn't slow. Not with Tsunade watching. Not when, for the first time, training felt like someone expected something of him. Like someone believed he could reach it. Tsunade stood at the edge of the field, her gaze razor sharp, watching him like a hawk sizing up its prey. In her palm, a handful of smooth, dense stones, each one carefully selected for weight and throw, rested like a loaded deck. She rolled them between her fingers with casual expertise, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Head up, Tsunade muttered under her breath. Loosen your legs. Watch your footing. Then, without warning, her fingers snapped forward. A rock zipped through the air like a dart. Naruto spotted the motion a second too late. He ducked on instinct, but the stone still grazed his shoulder, sending a sharp sting through his muscles. What the hell? He yelled, twisting mid-stride and nearly tripping. That could have hit my eye. Tsunade didn't flinch. Her smirk was unrelenting. And out there, it wouldn't be a rock. It'd be a kunai, or worse. Before he could fire back, another stone was already airborne. Naruto pivoted to dodge, but it struck his forehead protector with a loud clang, the impact knocking him off balance. He hit the ground hard, the world spinning as stars danced across his vision. Tsunade's voice cut through the haze, cold and flat. If that had been laced with chakra, you'd be dead. That little strip of metal isn't invincible, Naruto. Naruto lay there for a second, catching his breath, eyes squinting at the sky. For a moment, Naruto lay still, chest rising and falling in ragged rhythm. He didn't cry out. He didn't complain. Slowly, he sat up, dirt smudging his cheek, sweat dripping from his brow, and behind his eyes, a quiet fire started to burn. He met Tsunade's gaze head on. No flinch. No hesitation. All right, bring it on. Tsunade's smirk widened. Just like Kushina. Another stone flew, faster this time, sharp and precise, launched with Jonin-level force. But Naruto was ready. His legs screamed in protest, the weight vest biting into his shoulders, but he moved, twisting to the side, letting the stone slice through the air just inches from his cheek. A second one came from the left, he dropped low. A third from behind, he hit one knee, gritted his teeth, and surged forward, never stopping his run. Good, Tsunade murmured under her breath. No rolls. You're not dodging a trap, you're moving through a battlefield. Stay mobile. Another rock clipped his cheek, leaving a red welt, but Naruto didn't falter. He grunted, powering through, each step louder, stronger, more defiant than the last. The sting of the hits, the fire in his lungs, the ache in his limbs, it was all there. But beneath it all, deeper than the pain, was resolve. This wasn't about showing off. Not about pride. It was about proving, if only to himself, that he could take it. That he was worth training. Worth the effort. Worth saving. From the sideline, Shizune watched silently, her arms crossed tight. She had seen Tsunade train plenty of genin, plenty of hopefuls, but rarely like this. There was no yelling, no posturing. Just sharp silence and relentless pressure. Later, Naruto's arms trembled, slick with sweat and dirt as he powered through another push-up. His breathing was heavy, but steady, controlled. The afternoon sun baked the earth beneath him, patches of grass flattened where his hands and feet dug in. Every time he lowered himself, his elbows brushed the ground. Every time he pushed up, he could feel her presence above him, like a mountain perched on his back, both literal and metaphorical. Tsunade sat cross-legged on him like it was the comfiest bench in the world, casually sipping her tea as if she were at some high society garden party. But her eyes, sharp as scalpels, they tracked every twitch in his muscles, every shaky pause that lasted a second too long. 450, Naruto grunted, sweat dripping from his nose. Only 50 more. You're slowing down, Tsunade said lightly, swirling her tea. Might have to throw in some sit-ups after this. Or burpees. Naruto let out a strangled groan, equal parts exhaustion and dread. You're a sadist. Tsunade smirked over the rim of her cup. And you're still talking. So clearly, I'm not being sadist enough. He wheezed a laugh, shoulders quivering from strain. By the way, she added casually, like she wasn't crushing the life out of him with her full body weight, the record Jiraiya left me. Say you could make more than 1,500 shadow clones. So why only 4? Yeah, Naruto panted. Jiraiya-sensei advised me to limit my shadow clones to no more than 4. He instructed that I should wait for your permission before I consider using any more than that. Tsunade hummed, setting her cup down on her knee as her expression turned thoughtful. Huh, so the old perv can teach caution. Good. She leaned forward slightly, not enough to throw off his balance, but enough that Naruto felt it. Shadow clone memory feedback's no joke, kid. Every clone you pop feeds its experiences straight back into your brain. Too many, too fast. She tapped her temple with a finger. You're not just tired. You're cooked. Headaches, memory gaps, maybe even brain damage. Permanent. Naruto grunted again, this time in agreement, though his arms wobbled dangerously. And we both know you've only got so many brain cells to spare, Tsunade added with a sly grin. Hey, Naruto huffed, nearly face planting. I'm plenty smart. Naruto lowered himself again, holding the push-up at the bottom for 5 full seconds. His arms trembled under the strain, muscles screaming, but it wasn't the dull, grinding pain he'd grown used to. This burn was sharp, clean. It hurt, but in the right way. Like something broken being reforged. Tsunade watched him silently, her frown deepening. She remembered yesterday's scans all too well. Misaligned joints, bones that had healed crooked, tiny fractures hidden along his arms and ribs. Calcified scar tissue near the shoulder blades. Some of the breaks had been the kind you only got from being hit, hard and repeatedly. Others were so old she doubted Naruto even remembered getting them. It made her stomach twist. How's the realignment holding up? She asked after a moment, her voice lower now, more thoughtful than teasing. Naruto didn't hesitate. His voice came out steadier than before, less strained. Feels better. No more weird clicking. And I can twist my wrists now without feeling like they're about to pop out. Tsunade gave a small nod, taking another sip of her tea, though the taste had soured in her mouth. It sat heavy on her tongue. Her thoughts drifted, uninvited, back to a different time. A different Konoha. Back when the Uchiha crest still walked proudly through the streets. When influence and fear held more weight than justice. How poetic, she thought bitterly, that the very clan who helped tear this boy down, had turned to ash in the end. Karma had a long memory. But this boy, he was still standing. Tsunade exhaled slowly and rose to her feet, letting Naruto finish the last 10 reps without her weight pressing down on him. She gave him that small mercy, just this once. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the sky burned in brilliant streaks of gold and orange. The sunset painted everything in warm, fading light, and for a moment, it reminded her of another stubborn Uzumaki. One who once cursed vegetables like they were cursed seals and punched her homeroom teacher in the face for calling her difficult. All right, she said, brushing dust from her coat. Get some water, then take 5. We're moving into weighted squats next. Naruto groaned in protest, flopping onto his back like a felled tree. Are you sure you're not trying to kill me? Tsunade smirked without missing a beat. If I wanted to kill you, Naruto, you wouldn't see it coming. Now hydrate. You've still got a long way to go if you want to catch up to that dream of yours. Despite everything, aching muscles, blurred vision, lungs still catching up, Naruto smiled faintly. He reached for his water bottle with a hand that shook slightly and took a long, steady drink. His body was a wreck. His arms felt like wet noodles. His legs were probably planning a rebellion. But for the first time in forever, the pain didn't feel hollow. It felt like progress. The training ground had quieted into a soft hum. The sun hung low on the horizon now, bleeding orange and gold across the sky in lazy, lingering strokes. Long shadows stretched across the clearing, reaching from the trees like tired limbs settling down for the night. A breeze swept through, gentle and cool, rustling the leaves like whispered encouragement. In the center of it all, Naruto lay sprawled on the grass, arms splayed wide, chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. Sweat clung to his skin, soaking through his clothes, plastering tufts of blonde hair to his forehead. His fists were raw, knuckles scabbed and bruised from hours of drills and strikes. One hand had curled, without him noticing, around the edge of Tsunade's haori, just barely clinging to the fabric like a lifeline in his sleep. His face was peaceful, spent, and somewhere, under the exhaustion, content. Shizune stood a few feet away, arms crossed as she watched the boy lying in the grass, his breath finally even, his body limp with exhaustion. Her eyes held a mixture of concern and awe. How'd he do? She asked, her voice low, as if afraid to wake him. Tsunade didn't answer right away. She stood beneath a tree, arms folded beneath her chest, eyes fixed on Naruto's sleeping form. Her honey-brown gaze was narrowed, not with judgment, but thought. Measuring. Remembering. I gave him 3 times what Jiraiya planned, she said at last, her tone flat but not cold. 300 laps around the clearing. 1,500 push-ups. 1,200 squats. 1,000 strikes with each limb. Then I ran him through genjutsu resistance drills until he dropped. Shizune stared at her, mouth slightly open. Are you serious? Tsunade-sama, look at him, his hands are torn to ribbons. I know, Tsunade replied quietly, her eyes flicking away just for a second, just long enough to avoid looking directly at the boy's bruised and bloodied knuckles. But he didn't quit. Not once. And thanks to the fox, his healing's already kicked in. They looked worse earlier. Shizune followed her gaze, her expression softening as she looked at Naruto again. As battered as he was, he hadn't complained. Not once. That fact alone said more than any mission report ever could. I made dinner, she said softly. Think he'll wake up for it? Tsunade turned, heading toward the path that led back to the inn, her coat stirring slightly in the breeze. He will, she said over her shoulder. He needs a bath anyway. Kid smells like a wet dog rolled in a used bandage. Shizune winced. That's vivid. But she followed, quickening her pace to match. You sure you're not pushing him too hard? She asked after a moment. Tsunade didn't stop walking. Her reply came quieter, almost like she was speaking more to herself than to Shizune. His mother was tougher at his age, she said, her voice thick with something that wasn't quite grief. And she trained harder. She didn't say the rest aloud, but it hung in the air between them, heavy with memory and truth.